Hello everyone, this is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto formed a deadly Kunoichi harem with Anko Mitarashi, Hana Inuzuka and Shibo Aburame, Part 2. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. Following the previous day, Anko-sensei instructed them to gather outside the Hokage's office building at 10 a.m. to finalize their team placement and take a team photo. Shiho, always punctual, had no trouble with this arrangement. She set off from her own home, making her way along the well-trodden path that she would follow every morning to the academy. The only difference this time was that she had to sit and wait outside one of the largest buildings in Konoha. The office where the Hokage did his duties was at the top of the circular building. Shiho stood and craned her neck, trying to get a better look at the building. Her eyes focused on the large sign at the top of the structure, with the kanji for fire emblazoned prominently, visible to everyone in the village from any angle. The building was as iconic as the Hokage Rock itself, one of the few structures in the village that stood tall and imposing, radiating a sense of security throughout Konoha. Turning her gaze away from the building, she strolled over to the nearby benches and seated herself comfortably, as she had a good 30 minutes to spare. With the extra time, she took the opportunity to gather her thoughts about what lay ahead now that she was a part of Team 9. Immediately, she acknowledged that she was the weakest link within the team. Despite her additional training sessions with Naruto, she knew she was far from matching his combat prowess. Hana, who had been close to if not on par with Naruto's abilities, also posed a challenge. This realization prompted her to reaffirm her commitment to improving her combat skills, understanding that she didn't want to be the one constantly needing to be rescued if a mission went south. However, this train of thought led her to consider the nature of missions. Drawing from the stories her uncle had shared about his time as a shinobi before he found his place in the cryptoanalysis branch of the village, Shiho knew that missions were far from being a leisurely stroll. Every mission carried inherent risks, and neutrality between villages didn't guarantee friendly encounters when they did run into each other. There was also the threat of rogue ninja, bandits, and even those who just find pleasure in killing. She knew following their sensei's guidance would minimize these risks. After all, their primary role was reconnaissance, and combat was meant to be a last resort. She recognized the futility of her worrying thoughts, especially since they hadn't been a team for a full day, let alone taken on a mission. She shook her head, smiling at where her thoughts had led her. Not even a shinobi for a day, and I'm worrying about things out of my control, she thought. Determined to cast her concerns aside, she pulled out her book and settled in to wait for the rest of her team to arrive. She busied herself for a further 20 minutes until she heard a bark coming from her right, which caused her to turn her head and smile at her two approaching teammates and the three ninkin running towards her. The one at the front, she needed to learn their names as soon as possible, jumping onto the bench next to her and wagged its tail. She laughed and gave it a pat on the head as Hana and Naruto approached, as they did Shiho an eyebrow at the blonde's appearance. Gone was his old orange and blue jacket, which had been replaced with a newer black and orange one matching his orange pants and black sandals. However, it was what he now wore on his head and around his neck that made her smile. It's called a forehead protector for a reason, you know, she mimicked, quoting him from yesterday and giggling when he rolled his eyes at her. Naruto adjusted the goggles that had taken their spot on his head, his headband now wrapped around his neck instead. It was a graduation gift, he shrugged, looking down at his jacket as well. Ayame and Tuki would be annoyed if I didn't put them to use. Well, at least the jacket isn't as bright as before, Hana chimed in from his side. Or as big, Shiho added. Both girls shared a laugh at Naruto's expense. He sighed, slumping onto the bench, already appearing exasperated with their teasing. Their laughter only intensified when Taro decided to join in, licking Naruto's face in apparent sympathy. Hana decided to help Naruto out a bit and whistled the pup to get off the bench, allowing her to take the vacant seat. So, what do you think Anko-sensei will do with us today? She asked, signaling for the triplets to lay down. I dunno, Naruto said, wiping at his face. I'm hoping for a mission as soon as possible so I don't need to dip into my savings for rent. That would suck, Hana commented, thinking of his position. I hope she goes over what we did wrong yesterday. To say that she was still annoyed by the hunt through the village was putting it lightly. I hope she does as well, Shiho said. I would rather find out what we can improve on before we start taking missions outside the village. Her thoughts from earlier cemented the fact that she had to improve the most in case they get into a fight. Well, whatever it is, I'm sure we'll find out in a minute, Hana said, craning her neck over the back of the bench. Naruto and Shiho turned their body to look at what she was doing only to find Anko walking up to their spot. Good morning, Anko-sensei, Shiho greeted her approach. Mornin' specs, she yawned, clearing her eyes. Let's move and I'll fill you guys in on what's happening, she said, motioning towards the entrance of the building. The three genin nodded and followed her into the building. Upon entering the building, they were met with the hustle and bustle of the morning traffic. Many shinobi passed them, no doubt on their way to receive a mission or report on their completed ones. It was her first time in the administration building, even though it was right next to the academy, and she found herself sticking to Anko as they traversed the spiral staircase. Anko herself turned her head as she ascended the stairs to address her students. First things first, is we need to get our photo taken as a team and then hand them, and the documents I gave you yesterday, to the Hokage, she said, managing to catch the slight tightening of Naruto's jaw. Hokage-sama wasn't kidding when he said they weren't on good terms, she thought. This will probably last up until noon. After that, we can find a training field and I'll have you spar against me so I can get a feel of where you guys are at, and then I'll have you spar each other. What about taking a mission, sensei? Naruto asked. Keen to get started, Anko smiled, turning her head back to the front as they reached the top floor. We'll take a mission or two tomorrow depending on how you guys fare at the spar this afternoon. 2 missions? Shiho asked, confusion evident in her voice. Yeah kid, 2 missions, Anko said, mirth evident in her voice causing her students behind her to grow even more confused. Can't wait to see their faces when I smack them with AD rank, Anko thought, laughing to herself as she guided them onto the roof of the building where a photographer was set up. A long line of genin and sensei stood waiting for their photo to be taken. As her students saw the queue of the squads waiting for their photo, their shoulders slumped at having to wait in line. Naruto turned to face her. You coulda told us to meet you up here, you know. Anko smiled sheepishly, rustling Naruto's hair as she did so. Patience is a ninja's greatest virtue, kid. Despite the sound response, Hana and Naruto just gave her an unimpressed look whilst Shiho smiled at her sensei's antics, causing Anko to subconsciously label her as her favorite of the 3 already. Being Hokage meant that he was seen as the most powerful and respected person in the village. One would think that power and respect would be on show every day as a sign of unwavering strength, but in reality, all the title brought him was paperwork. Lots and lots of paperwork. However, this week had been a breath of fresh air for Hiruzen, as with the new shinobi graduating from the academy, it meant that his daily paperwork now included breaks of meeting and officiating the next generation of genin teams. The Jonin sensei were given a week to have them officiated, and he had already received his first batch of happy genin yesterday, the visits leaving him with a smile on his face as he was able to watch the best and brightest of this year's crop begin to pave out a future for themselves within the ranks of Konoha. It was at that moment that a knock at his door tore him from his paperwork. Come in, he called, taking his pipe out from his mouth. Mitarashi Anko entered first, a smile on her face as she led her team into the room. Good morning, Hokage-sama, she greeted, bowing slightly as she stood in the middle of the room. He returned the greeting with a nod and allowed his eyes to trail over her genin as they entered behind her. His eyes first landed on the young Inuzuka Hana, her brown hair neatly styled in a bob cut with 2 bangs framing her face, accentuating her striking jet black eyes. The bold red markings framing her cheeks labeled her as an Inuzuka, if her 3 white ninkin didn't give it away. She donned a beige windbreaker with a fur collar, along with gray form-fitting shorts and a pair of black sandals. If it weren't for the slight fidgeting of her fingers, Hiruzen would have sworn a younger Inuzuka Sume, Hana's mother, stood in front of him. Who am I kidding? Sume would have barged through the door before her sensei at that age, he thought comically. His eyes moved to Hayashi Shiho. Her light blonde hair was casually tied into a loose ponytail, a few strands falling over her forehead protector. Her green eyes sat behind a pair of rounded black glasses. She wore a navy windbreaker that was unzipped, showing off a simple beige t-shirt that went with her burgundy shorts and black sandals. Unlike the Inuzuka beside her, Shiho was a vibrating ball of nervousness as she stood in front of him. The unusualness of standing before the Hokage wasn't lost on her, and it was one she looked at in high regard. He gave her a gentle smile to ease her worries, happy when her shoulders seemed to relax if only a little. The final genin entered, and Hiruzen found his smile to grow a little as he looked at the boy he hadn't seen in years. Uzumaki Naruto stood alongside his teammates, his blonde hair kept from falling onto his face as a pair of gray goggles sat on his forehead, and the headband that would normally be there sat around his neck. The unmistakable whisker markings on his cheeks made him stand out. Unknown to himself, they were the result of being exposed to the Kyuubi's chakra along with being its Jinchuriki. He wore a black and orange tracksuit jacket, matching his orange trousers and black sandals. The boy definitely had changed since the last time he set foot in his office. The look of indifference was a stark contrast to the bright smile he would always have on display, and instead of the slouched, carefree manner he used to display, he now looked more confident and sure of himself, which made Hiruzen both happy and sad at the same time. Good morning, Hokage-sama. Both Hana and Shiho copied their sensei, with the latter giving a deeper bow. However, Hiruzen's eyes were still focused on Naruto as they greeted him, allowing him to watch as the boy's face of indifference morphed into a slight frown, jaws set in a tight line and his fists clenched at his sides. A stark difference indeed, he thought, shaking himself from his funk, and moved to address the room. Good morning, everyone, he said, clearing his throat. I hope that you've enjoyed the little time you've had with Anko here. He motioned to the young woman. It's been great so far, Hokage-sama, Shiho responded, finding her voice. Anko-sensei put us through our paces yesterday. Yeah, Uzumaki tore his jacket up because of it, Hana laughed, causing Hiruzen to turn his attention to Naruto once again, his face still unchanged. Well, at least you managed to go and get yourself a fitting replacement, he asked the boy, who just grunted out an agreement. The girls standing next to him finally took notice of the blonde's weird behavior. The terse reply caused a slight pause in the room, as the Hokage was at least hoping for Naruto to answer his question with more words. Anko herself was finally able to visualize the exact relationship between the two, and Hana and Shiho just looked uncomfortable in the silence. Anko decided to move the conversation and added to Hana's comment, yeah, they weren't all too happy about jumping into the forest of death, she said, causing Hiruzen to raise an eyebrow at the impressiveness of a fresh genin team. Ah, a courageous team already, he remarked, putting his hand out. Then let's get them officiated so that you can build upon that courage, shall we? Anko nodded, handing over the scroll containing the squad's documents. Both glad that the moment had passed, Hiruzen opened the scrolls and read away. His eyes skimming over the signatures and landing on the new photo that had just been taken on the roof of the building. The photo was unique, matching the squad perfectly, he thought. Anko stood at the back, a bright grin on her face, her hands placed on the shoulders of Hana and Shiho, who stood to the far left and right, encapsulating Naruto, who was slightly crouched down in the middle. The thing that made it unique was the 3 ninkin that were included in the group photo. Hana had one of them sitting on her shoulder, whilst Shiho had another cradled in her arms, and lastly Naruto had managed to stuff one into his jacket so its head poked out from his own collar, sitting just under his chin. And if the matching grins across all of the genin's faces were anything to go by, Hiruzen knew that this team would get along just fine. Unique, he said, voicing his inner thoughts and smiling when one of the pups barked at his choice of words. Picking up his Hokage seal, he stamped the document and placed it into a box at the side of his desk, joining the rest of the documents. With that out of the way, I just want to say that I wish Team 9 all the best for their and hope that you guys carry the will of fire within you as you carry out missions on behalf of the village. They thanked him for his words as they were dismissed from the office, Naruto being the first to exit. Once they left, Hiruzen found himself turning his chair to face out towards the Hokage monument. A heavy sigh filled with emotion escaped him as his gaze landed on the fourth figure's head, although his thoughts were interrupted as there was a knock at the door. This time it opened without his call and in walked a man holding a cane and bandages covering the right side of his face. "What do I owe the pleasure, Danzo?" he asked, already not looking forward to the conversation that was to come. As Team 9 left the Hokage's office, Naruto walked out ahead of the others, his expression still clouded with the earlier tension. Enko watched as he descended the stairs, allowing herself to mull over the situation. The relationship that Naruto and the Hokage had with each other was something she didn't want to get involved in as it wasn't any of her business, but she knew that with the Hokage giving her permission to tell Naruto of his status if the situation called for it caused her to be involved if only a little. Not telling the kid what he was definitely wasn't the choice she would have made. An oblivious Jinchuriki is the same as an out-of-control Jinchuriki in her book at least, but she wasn't going to argue the Hokage's word. However, as they neared the exit, she decided to herself that if what the Hokage had told her before, with Jiraiya being the one that was going to speak to him, she promised that if he didn't appear in the near future, she would bring it up to the Hokage. If she was in Naruto's shoes, she would want to know everything and she believed he ought to learn everything sooner than later. Already feeling sappy for the brat, she thought, quickening her pace, as Naruto reached the doors to leave, she swiftly moved to his side and put him into a headlock, laughing as he struggled to get out of it. "Come on, Naruto," she said, turning them both so the rest of the squad could see them. "You can't be getting all moody on us on our first day as a team, can he, ladies?" Shiho laughed, while Hana shook her head smiling. "No, he can't, sensei," she said, getting barks of agreement from her companions. "Exactly. So how about we go beat the shit out of each other for a while? It certainly is a beautiful day for it, don't ya think?" Onlookers passed by, some looking annoyed while some looked at the situation in jest. Naruto himself muffled out a response, causing Anko to loosen her grip a little to let him speak. "What's that? I can't hear ya." "I said fine, let go of me then." "That's not good enough, brat. I need more passion than that," Anko said, motioning with her head for the girls to follow her as she continued walking ahead. Naruto let out a growl at the embarrassing position he was in. "I'm gonna kick your sensei," he managed to get out, causing Anko to tighten the hold once more. "Ha ha ha, now that's more like it, kid, although I wouldn't make promises you can keep. It'll only hurt you in the end." Hana and Shiho just smiled at the situation as they followed along. While they didn't understand why Naruto was acting that way in front of the Hokage of all people, they were just glad that Anko had managed to lighten the mood. They were sure that the more they got to know each other, they would find his reasonings for the way he acted. Shiho herself believed that it would also answer her questions of why he was treated the way he was. Even now as they walked through the village, people were giving both Anko and Naruto a wide berth. However, this time she would chalk that up to the fact that their sensei was howling with laughter as she dragged Naruto by the head across the village. Hidden beneath his sensei's coat, Naruto's lips curled into a small, genuine smile. It had only been a day, but Anko was already proving herself as someone he could trust. Despite the firm grip on his neck, he understood that she was doing it to cheer him up, and there weren't many people Naruto knew that would go out of their way to make him happy. "Hey!" Anko yelled, interrupting his thoughts. "You'd better not be falling asleep on me, brat." Naruto's train of thought slowly faded as he felt Anko slide a wet finger into his ear. "Ack! You bastard! There we go!" Anko laughed, wiggling her finger, prompting Naruto to yell and squirm in response, thought you'd gone mute for a second. After a good 5 minutes, Anko eventually let up on her hold on him, only to run as he chased after her, causing the rest of the squad to play catch-up. Their chase came to a stop when she led them into an empty training ground, devoid of any trees or foliage. Anko grinned mischievously as she looked at her team, her arms spread wide. This is the perfect spot for me to test your guys' ability, so let's go. Come at me with everything you've got. Hana, Shiho and Naruto exchanged eager glances, their enthusiasm evident on their faces. Naruto, still standing at the front of the group, nodded and wasted no time in leading the assault. Your funeral, sensei. He called out. Hana flanked him with the dogs as Shiho broke off from the group, taking off to the right of the fight to encircle their sensei. Anko grinned as they approached, already happy that they were working as a unit. Don't get, she yelled back, throwing a hail of shuriken at Hana and Naruto, rushing to meet them head-on. Naruto grunted as he clashed with the woman, jabbing out with his left hand and attempting a grab with his right. Anko sent a powerful low kick to his front leg, causing him to stumble and get sent back into Hana as she front kicked his chest. Entangling himself with the Inuzuka, he allowed her to take point, as her dogs had Anko surrounded already. On Hana's call, Naruto watched the triplets attack at the same time, only for Anko to leap up and use one of the dogs to spring forwards and hit their master with another frontal kick. Not wanting to be tangled again, Naruto twirled past her and sent forth a kick of his own, annoyed when she softened the blow by rolling with the kick. Noticing Shiho, and a handful of Bunshin, behind their sensei, he whipped a kunai out and slashed at her, pushing her backwards. She noticed his intent as she turned her head behind her and back to him. His wrist was ensnared in her grip as she prevented any more slashes. He went to throw a punch with his left hand but was taken off guard as a small snake snuck out from her sleeve and pounced at his face, its jaw open wide. He grabbed it before it managed to latch onto his face, only to get a fist planted into his right cheek and then to be thrown away as Anko turned to Shiho and her copies. He lay there for a moment, the snake still wriggling in his hand, and got his breath back. Charging in one-on-one wasn't working, and the three of them taking turns to attack her wasn't working either. They had to do it together at the same time, and even then, he wasn't stupid to think it would work. They were just out of the academy. Rising to his feet and tossing the snake away a good enough distance away, he watched on as Hana and Shiho must have come to the same conclusion as himself, as they were both attacking from two different sides at once. Deciding to join them, he took Shiho's earlier idea and brought his hand into the familiar seals for the clone jutsu. 6 doppelgangers appeared around him, and he charged in once again. Hana and Shiho noticed him, causing their sensei to as well. Turning, she caught 7 copies of himself rushing her at once. He himself was positioned at the middle left, glad as 3 of the 6 copies had just been dispelled with shuriken. He and the clones formed a line formation as they closed in, Hana and Shiho still pressing the purple-haired woman. She must have known the first was a fake as she allowed it to fall through her. The second was dispelled as one of the dogs got thrown at it, forcing him to jump over it. He and the final clone fell side by side and threw 2 front kicks at her midsection. The timing was perfect as Hana and Shiho both threw 2 punches at her head, while the 2 dogs went for her legs. She was caught and couldn't do shit about it. His grin threatened to split his face as their attacks closed in, time seeming to slow as they did so. They all landed at once. Anko's face was smooshed between 2 fists, her posture caved in as his foot made impact with her midsection and both her legs were trapped in the jaws of the dogs. Gotcha! Hana exclaimed, her grin matching his own. However, their work fell apart in front of them as their sensei vanished in a puff of smoke, obscuring their vision. A surprised yelp came from Shiho as the smoke dissipated. He and Hana were left looking at Shiho, who was buried shoulder deep into the ground, a confused and uncomfortable look on her face. Hair stood on his arms at that moment, causing him to jump back, his senses screaming at him as where he had stood 2 hands broke out trying to ensnare him. Hana wasn't as fast. as her right leg was snatched and pulled under, leaving her in an awkward position. Looks like you got lucky. Runt. Anko rose from the ground in front of him, raising her hand as he made to charge her once more. Your last standing, so you win. Confusion was evident on their faces as Anko laughed. Well, I did say that you would be sparring with each other, so, this makes it easier, she said, turning to Hana and Shiho, the latter being dug out of the ground by 3 dogs as Hana was now standing. You two got caught first, so you're sparring each other. Specs, your taijutsu is the worst of you 3, but it's an easy fix, she said, glad that the girl seemed to not take offense as she nodded. You both spar together and try to learn from what Hana's doing, she's throwing moves that work with her size. Remember, it's a spar, so don't hit as hard as you were with me just now. She looked down at the 3 dogs. You 3 need to sit out for a bit, so go do dog things, she finished lamely. The triplets barked and lay down, causing Hana to facepalm. Right. Anko clapped her hands. Get started while I talk with Blondie. Hana and Shiho moved away a good distance as Anko turned to him. You and Hana are on the same level when it comes to taijutsu, but if the dogs aren't with her, then you take the cake, she said. Naruto nodded in agreement as he had already believed that to be the case. So, the only way you can get better at taijutsu is through experience at this point, which you will get as you take missions outside the village. Yeah, that makes sense. Just gotta make sure I don't get my skull caved in if I come up against someone out of my league. His pragmatic response got a snort from Anko. Yeah, that comes with being a ninja, kid. Although it won't always come down to a taijutsu match, and as I said yesterday, you're gonna be the powerhouse on the team. At the mention of his role, he failed to contain the excitement that grew on his face in the form of a smirk. So what? You're gonna teach me jutsu instead of sparring? He asked. If he was being honest, it was a little unfair sending his other teammates away to spar whilst he was getting a one-on-one from their sensei. However, the bark of laughter from his sensei gave him a feeling that he was wrong. This was further proven when she reached into her pouch and threw a kunai at him, his eyes unable to track the speed of the projectile. I don't play favorites, brat. The blood falling from the cut on his cheek was evidence of that. I'll give you stuff to work on after today's spar, and then once you 3 finish what I've given you, I'll give you another. So, it's down to your own ability to get stronger. Sound good? He nodded his head in agreement. Great, now let's dance. Once again the speed of his sense caught him off guard, and the fist that planted itself in his side sent a massive pain through his side, making him realize just how much she had held back in their 3-on-1 bout. I am beginning to hate you, he wheezed. His legs were swiftly swept out from underneath him, leaving him to look up into the amused eyes of Anko. Meanwhile, concealed amidst the dense foliage near the border of the land of fire and the land of wind, 2 figures knelt in perfect seiza, their forms obscured by the enormous oak trees that shielded them from prying eyes. The silence of the forest enveloped them as they sat with eyes closed, each holding a hand seal as they focused on holding a jutsu. Both figures sat in the same getup, black cloaks with red clouds and a straw hat obscuring their identity from those they would pass. However, at that moment the seal they had been holding was released, allowing for their eyes to flicker open. One figure possessed eyes that resembled golden slits, akin to a snake's gaze. The other's eyes were as chilling, if not more so than their partners', as they burned with an intense, almost hypnotic crimson hue. Their pupils were encircled by the unmistakable presence of 3 spinning tomo, a symbol of the infamous Uchiha's Sharingan. They rose to their feet and departed their secluded clearing in silence, merging with the public road leading them further away from the land of wind deeper into the land of fire. A signpost ahead indicated that Tanzaku quarters, still several hours away, would be their first destination. The Uchiha broke the silence as they turned from the signpost and began walking, not even glancing at his companion. We will keep to the roads at an even pace to prevent running into any squads from Konoha. Behind him the man adjusted his hat as he followed. Wise choice, we wouldn't want to slaughter innocent Konoha nin now, would we? The Uchiha turned, his hat raised slightly to stare into the eyes of his companion, an unnerving look on his face. have you got something to say, Orochimaru? Kukuku, not at all Itachi-kun. I'm just thinking of what's best for the mission we have been given. He laughed, clearly undisturbed by his partner's threat as they both continued down the path, the sun beating down above them as they did so. Enko leapt effortlessly from rooftop to rooftop as her eyes scanned the horizon of the village as she made her way to Ichiraku's, the unofficial meeting spot for her squad. The past month had definitely been a productive one, and despite her initial worries in becoming a sensei, she found the experience to be great. Being able to pass on her skills to others wasn't one she thought she would find enjoyment from, but watching her students take to new jutsu like a fish in water gave her a feeling of accomplishment that she hadn't felt in a long time. She had watched as Hana, Naruto and Shiho grew from a good crop of genin that would have gave a chunin a tough time in a fight to a solid unit that would give a seasoned chunin a run for their money. Hana, along with her ninkin, had managed to strengthen their collaboration jutsu. Now they were able to carry out their techniques at a faster speed, leading to a much deadlier outcome than before. While she couldn't help her with clan techniques, Enko had managed to add to the girl's tracking knowledge and put her and the pups through the ringer with taijutsu sparring. She had forced the girl to be without the triplets for the majority of her tracking training with her, as she ingrained into her that she might not always be with her ninkin, and it was stupid to waste her Inuzuka senses by relying too heavily on their companionship. Naruto was easy to teach, she found. The boy had a chin on him, and every time he got put down, he would roll with it and give it back tenfold, or try to when it came to sparring with her. Teaching him ninjutsu had been something she believed few would witness in their lives. He had picked up a few jutsu fairly easy, which was good for a rookie, but that wasn't the impressive part. Whenever he couldn't get something down, he would put enough chakra into a technique to brute force it, and, even she who wasn't a sensor, was able to feel the chakra he wasted in doing so. Once the jutsu was brute forced, he would manage to work backwards on the technique, and not long after he was able to get it down to the point that using it in battle would further build on his experience. Despite the boy's progress this month, it was Shiho who impressed her the most. Enko knew that Shiho had confidence issues. She constantly compared herself to Hana and Naruto, and in doing so she kept thinking that she was leaps behind the other two because she wasn't as good of a fighter as them. Enko decided against telling her that she wasn't leaps behind, and instead used that fire in her eyes to push her the most this month. Over the month she had finally been able to go toe-to-toe with Naruto and Hana in sparring. Her taijutsu was what had lacked before, but now the gap was closed, and the confidence boost the girl got from it propelled her into believing in herself more, resulting in a few genjutsu techniques being learned along with slightly being able to use a small ninjutsu to pull moisture out the air. Pausing on the edge of the rooftop, she halted her thoughts and observed Ichiraku's from across the street. Naruto was busy behind the counter, helping Ayame, despite the fact that he had to quit working there after becoming a ninja. As he helped the young girl, Hana and Shiho conversed with each other on the stools. Enko shook her head as Naruto splashed Ayame with the leftover water in one of the newly washed ramen bowls, earning a playful slap in retaliation. Despite not being employed there anymore, he still spent his free time there, which usually had him throwing on his apron once again. Enko had found that out over the past month, as when she couldn't find him at his apartment or at their usual training ground, he was always here with the father-daughter duo. Team 9-8 here at least once a week due to this, with Hana teasing the blonde on his reason for the ramen stand being his favorite. As smart as he was blind to the accusation Hana was making between him and the waitress, who failed to deny the accusations on her part if the way Ayame behaved around him when they were together. While Hana was correct in her accusations, she hadn't yet realized that here was the only place he was going to be treated normally. As she watched from her spot, she felt the mission scroll in her jacket pocket. She had decided to give them a shot at AC rank after impressing her the whole month and not losing their minds over the never-ending D ranks. It was all fun and games watching them the past month get progressively more fed up with the chores, but she knew when it was getting out of hand, especially the few times Naruto had to deal with ignorant clients, causing the two girls to begin getting curious about his treatment within the village. Their last D rank had them packing away belongings of the client that was moving home. Anko had left her team to get on with it, but once she got back, she managed to catch the client hovering over the Jinchuriki, critiquing his effort, and scolding him for being rough with their fragile things, despite Naruto causing no issues at all. The boy had the patience of a saint, but everyone had their limits, and she would rather not see him retaliating against a client. It also brought on the issue of Hana and Shiho being suspicious of his treatment, with them talking about it in hushed whispers whenever they thought she was out of earshot, or when Hana had glared openly at a few vocal villagers whenever they got too loud for their own good. When that time was, Anko didn't know or have the say in, but a mission outside the village would suffice as her way of helping out a little by letting Naruto have a breather and stop Hana and Shiho from asking too many questions. She was brought out of her thoughts as the three ninkin around Hana's stool raised their heads, one of them letting out a bark as they finally recognized her scent, causing those occupying the stools to turn to her, smiling as they saw her. Her focus shifted to the three pups that raised their heads from the feet of the stools. Haro, she thinks, let out a bark as they finally recognized her scent, causing Hana and Shiho to turn to her. They're better than at the start of the month, that's for sure, she thought as she leapt from her spot and landed in front of them, patting their heads as she went through the awning. Hey sensei, Naruto greeted, looking over his shoulder from where he stood chopping onions, receiving a nod from her in response. She pulled out a stool for herself, sitting next to Hana, who looked at her expectantly. Let me guess, we've got a mission? She asked, Shiho's head tilted behind her waiting for confirmation. Anko grinned and reached into her coat pocket, rolling a scroll onto the counter, making Hana's eyes widen as she jumped out of her seat grabbing the scroll. Yes, she cheered, no more chores. Naruto joined from behind the counter with his cheers, and Shiho, while less rambunctious about it, celebrated on the higher-ranked mission. All of them shared fist bumps, and even Ayame received one from Naruto, who smiled at seeing him happy. However, Anko caught the worried look that crossed her brow as Naruto leaned over the counter to read the scroll's contents. We're leaving in an hour, so go home, grab your packs and meet me at the north gate, she commanded, happy when Hana and Shiho nodded and left. Naruto hung his apron on a peg, said his goodbyes to Ayame and threw one into the back to Tuki, before he gave a two-fingered salute and left in a shunshin, the Norin curtain swaying with his departure. As they settled to their normal position, Tuki came out from the back and stood next to his daughter and stared into Anko's eyes. I know Naruto is capable of looking after himself, but please look after him, Anko-san, Tuki said, bowing slightly with Ayame following suit. He's grown a lot, but I still do worry about him sometimes. Anko chuckled, rising from the stool, slightly abashed at the respect she was being given. Don't worry about it, we'll be gone a week max, she assured, making to leave the stand herself, catching Ayame's eye before she exited. We'll be back before you know it, trust me. It had taken Team 9 a day and a half to navigate the unfamiliar terrain, with Anko relentless in pushing their endurance to the limits. Although this was their first venture beyond Hai no Kuni, Anko refused to ease their pace. She was determined to teach them to push past their limits, ensuring they wouldn't become liabilities in the field. As the squad crossed the border into Yu no Kuni, the pungent sulfuric smell invaded their nostrils as they approached Yugakure, the village hidden in hot springs. The once militaristic village had transitioned into a pacifistic tourist destination, capitalizing on its renowned hot springs. Their current mission, a simple C-rank retrieval task, aimed to retrieve the delivery of supplies for a client back in Konoha. Anko monitored her genin as they traversed the trees, jumping from branch to branch. With a raised fist, she signaled them to stop. We should take to the ground from here on out, she advised, dropping to the foliage below. We don't need Yugakure shinobi thinking we're a threat. Following her led onto the gravelly dirt road, Team 9 realized that they weren't far from the village as an imposing torii gate stood out in the distance. The large wooden structure stood tall as a landmark amongst the sulfuric clouds rising around the land. The sun was low in the sky as they approached the gate. A warm golden glow shone through the gaps of the gate, casting the squad in a ray of light as they approached the check-in station. Naruto took in the slight serene moment, inhaling deeply the smell of sulfur in the air. Glad you're enjoying the smell. Hana chimed in from his side, a hand rubbing at her nose. This place reeks. Her three ninkin whined at her feet, agreeing with her. It's not that bad, Naruto defended, squinting at the brief ray of light that blinded his eyes. Yeah, that's 'cause you have a weak sense of smell, Hana retorted, her chest puffed out with a sense of clan pride despite the situation she was in. I guess so, Naruto shrugged, a smirk on his face. I would hate to have your sense of smell every time I took a shit. That's disgusting, Naruto-kun, Shiho chided at the blonde's crass remark. Despite the remark being aimed at her, Hana took it on the chin and laughed, with Naruto joining in. In front of them, Anko concealed a smile from the team as they approached the check-in station. Right, that's enough for now, you guys, she stated, pulling out a scroll from her jacket. Let's get signed in and grab the client's order. After that we can book a room and you guys can do whatever you want for the rest of the night. The trio behind her straightened, internally cheering at the freedom they were going to have. Yes, Anko-sensei, Shiho answered for the others as reached the desk. As they approached the sign-in desk, they came face to face with a seated Yugakure shinobi. A woman with a slim build and a pretty smile dipped her head in greeting. She wore a padded brown flak vest, the symbol of Yugakure proudly displayed on her shoulder pad. Beneath the padded vest, she wore a comfier and looser vest top. Her sleek white hair was done up in a tight ponytail, a few strands framed her face similar to Hana's. Welcome to Yugakure, she greeted with a welcoming smile and gentle voice that surprised Naruto, who had expected a more guarded reception from foreign shinobi. Her green eyes looked over Team 9. What's the reason for your visit, Shinobi-san? Anko, accustomed to the formalities, presented the mission scroll containing her team's identification. We have a mission to retrieve some goods for a client back in our village, she replied, handing over the necessary documents to be allowed entry. The woman inspected the documents, her sharp eyes roaming the page with a practiced eye. Thank you for your cooperation, Anko-san, she said, handing back the documents. Feel free to explore the village and enjoy your stay. If you need any assistance, don't hesitate to ask any member of our forces. Anko nodded, with Shiho giving a slight bow behind her, motioning for Team 9 to enter the village. Upon passing the Torii gate, they were met with the enchanting features of the village. Soft glows from lanterns illuminated the cobblestone pathways. Wooden bridges spanned the small canals that crisscrossed the village. The houses and buildings were that of small townhouses. Dark wooden roofs with intricate carvings and latticework added to the elegance of the village as villagers passed them by, wrapped up in comfortable clothing. Everyone held faces of tranquility as they bobbed along, many looking at the small stores and street stalls as they did so. Even as they looked over the low buildings, they could see majestic cliffs that had their own sulfur clouds rising from them. A truly tranquil effect befell over the village. The gas, illuminated by the lowering sun, added an otherworldly hue over the area. The unique charm of Yugakure, with its elegant townhouses, cobblestone paving, wooden bridges, hot water canals and lantern-lit pathways, painted a picturesque scene that set it apart from the energy back home. Anko smiled at the reactions of her genin. Nothing like back home, huh? She asked as the team watched a few kids squeal at the three ninkin as they passed by, their parents holding them back from running over. Naruto, all too accustomed to the wary glances and hushed whispers that would follow him back home, found himself in an unfamiliar situation. Vendors called out cheerfully, inviting him to explore their wares. Children didn't get pulled away. Instead, their curious eyes followed Team 9 with interest. People nodded in greeting, acknowledging them with a kindness Naruto had only ever experienced within the Ichiraku's stand. In the streets of Yugakure, he realized something that left an unsettling thought within his mind. For once in his life, he wasn't met with the weird and unwarranted looks he faced back in Konoha. Here, in this foreign land, he was just another person. As Anko's question lingered in the air, Naruto cleared his throat, ignoring the feeling in his chest. Yeah, it's nothing like Konoha. After they managed to track down the location of the store, the sun had begun to set across the horizon. Anko had managed to find reasonably priced lodgings for the night, managing to get 2 rooms so that Naruto didn't have to share with her and the girls. She hadn't missed the meaning behind Naruto's statement earlier, and she knew that as soon as they got back home the kid would most likely push for another few missions outside of Konoha, and she couldn't blame him for it. She couldn't begin to understand the feelings that he must have at the moment, but she allowed them to do what they wanted for the rest of the night so that they could all experience the world outside the walls of Konoha, and she would be lying if she didn't do it more for Naruto's sole benefit. While she had wanted them to experience the village for themselves, she was currently trailing Naruto, who had notified her that he was going to look around for a bit before calling it a night. She knew it was up not letting the kid have some privacy, but she wanted to keep an eye on him. So, she kept her distance from afar, using the bustling crowd to hide herself along with a small transformation jutsu to change her hair color and turn her forehead protector into a cloth headband. She could tell from her position that Naruto was just soaking in the experience as he strolled down the lantern-lit streets of the village. A vendor called out to him as he passed his stand, causing Naruto to stiffen slightly at being called to. She watched as he approached the stand and chatted with the man, who was trying to goad Naruto into participating in a can toss game. He shrugged his shoulders and handed over the ryo, receiving a few balls to throw at the targets. A few people stopped to look at his attempt. A little girl stood next to him cheering him on. To the surprise of the onlookers, he tossed the first ball with enough force to smack all of the cans off the shelf, causing a few to clap their hands at his skill. The stall owner handed over a large stuffed rabbit, albeit begrudgingly. Naruto rubbed at the back of his neck as the little girl next to him babbled to him. Anko chuckled slightly at his discomfort. The mother tried to move on, sending Naruto an apologetic smile, but he surprised them both and even Anko herself as he handed over the stuffed animal, patting the little girl on the head before saying his goodbyes and continuing his stroll down the street. Anko smiled at the little heartwarming interaction as she passed the mother and daughter, continuing to keep the same distance between herself and her genin. The fact that he was already having such interactions with strangers within a day of arriving in Yugakure left a bad taste in her mouth. She moved to follow him, passing by the mother and the ecstatic daughter who was looking as if she had the world in her arms. Following him didn't continue much longer, as at fate would have it the ramen nut eventually found himself a seat at a small ramen stand. Anko shook her head at the boy's fanaticism for ramen. She wouldn't put it past him and say that he had sniffed it out. Deciding she wouldn't mind a bowl of ramen, Anko released the transformation jutsu and approached the ramen stand. Of course, you would end up here. Saw it and couldn't resist the pull it had on me. Naruto turned to her with a smile. What are you doing here? She slid onto the stool beside him. Thought I would get something to eat and saw you here, decided I would join you. The old lady running the stand turned around to both of them. Both Naruto and Anko gave their order before she turned again to prepare their meal. So how are you finding the mission so far? Anko asked her student as they waited. It's okay, I guess, he replied, resting his back against the stand as he looked to the streets. It's just a glorified D rank but without the hassle. Anko laughed. Wait until you're having to play bodyguard to some merchant, then, you'll be begging to do a D rank. He smirked at the anticipation of what's to come. Well, at least with guarding clients, there's a chance of getting some action, you know. Their ramen was placed in front of them, and Naruto dug in. Anko chose to wait until hers cooled down. There's still a chance of getting into a fight even on this mission, so don't ever let your guard down. Besides, looking for action is what gets you killed, so don't go looking for it. He stopped his eating, taking in her words with a thoughtful expression as he pondered her advice for a moment before resuming his meal, a contemplative look in his eye. Anko observed him as she ate, deciding to change the topic slightly. So, besides the mission, how's it feels being away from home? she asked, sipping the broth of her ramen. Naruto glanced at her, considering her question. Enko watched as if a conversation with himself played out in front of her, as if he was struggling to answer. It's different, but I don't need to tell you that I'm guessing. He asked her with a pointed look, to which Enko nodded once, causing him to deflate slightly. She didn't mean to ruin the boy's mood as he stayed silent for a moment, twirling his chopsticks around in his hand. You don't need to answer it, Naruto. I saw it when we first got here. I was just wondering how you truly felt about it, that's all. He nodded at her reasoning. Well, I'm treated like shit back in Konoha for a reason that everyone but me knows about. The old bastard won't tell me anything either, and I am supposed to just deal with that and be all cool with everyone. Enko saw his shoulders ease up as he spoke, as if a weight was being lifted from him as the words came from his mouth. I want answers, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, does it? Enko frowns at the question. If she was in his shoes, she would be fighting tooth and nail for the answers. Of course it matters, everyone should know things that concern themselves. Don't you want to know the truth? I did. He shook his head. I do. But it really doesn't change anything. At the end of the day, people are still gonna treat me the same. The only difference is I'll know the reason for it. Enko nodded, understanding the thought process behind his attitude towards his treatment. While she could see how he doesn't bat an eye back home to it, she couldn't simply leave it like that. The Hokage gave her the role as Team 9's sensei, and that meant she had to look after them as if they were her family. She knew that the Hokage had promised he would tell him when the time was right, but with Naruto's true feelings being told to her, she couldn't shake off the determination to address the issue with the Hokage when they return home. You might be right about people not changing, but knowing the truth could give you a sense of closure that you didn't know you needed. He placed his now empty bowl onto the top shelf of the stand, before standing up and giving her an easy smile. Look, sensei, I've got Ayame and Tuki back home, and last month I got you guys too. As long as I have that, then I don't care about anything else. All I want to do is serve my time as a ninja, and if I don't die doing this, I'll just retire and help Ayame run the stand when the old man's knees give out, okay? Enko couldn't help but smile back at the blonde's straightforward life plan. You sure you don't want to aim higher than a ramen cook? Maybe I'll convince them to franchise Ichiraku's, he said as he turned to leave, waving over his shoulder. I'll see you in the morning, sensei. Yeah, see you in the morning, brat, she called back, turning to finish her bowl of noodles. The little lady behind the counter looked at the empty spot next to her. I guess you've been left to pay the young man's bill. Enko laughed. Little will hear about this tomorrow. She reached for her wallet, chuckling at the antics of her genin. As she eventually made her way back to the hotel, she found Shiho and Hana curled up on the floor of their room, the dogs being used as pillows. She moved silently as to not wake them. One of the pups opened their eyes in recognition before closing once again. As Enko got comfortable in her futon, she vowed to speak with the Hokage and push for the kid to know about his status soon. As she closed her eyes, a sharp stinging sensation burned on her neck as her curse mark began acting up, causing her to turn on her side and wait for it to pass. Thankfully, she didn't have to wait long until she became numb to the pain, managing to get comfortable once again before drifting off to sleep, unaware that her genin would find out about his status sooner than she thought. As the morning sun started breaking through the room's windows, Hana stood stretching in the middle of the room, her back letting out a satisfying pop. The hotel futon was better than what they had to camp on in the forest days prior, but it was not as comfortable as her own bed back home. The pungent sulfuric odor that assaulted her senses yesterday had become more bearable. Even with the windows closed, she could still smell the iconic smell of the village, but it only bothered her now if she intentionally focused on it. Nonetheless, she wasn't eager to stay another day here. As she let out a sigh of relief, Shiho had just rolled away their futons and her three ninkin sat awaiting patiently by the door. The sound of a toilet flushing signaled their sensei's exit from the bathroom. As she walked out, she muttered something about the perils of street food, prompting two smiles from Hana and Shiho. Their sensei, noticing that they were ready to go, grinned at them. All right, let's grab Naruto and figure out if we're having breakfast or hitting the road. Following Anko out, the girls and pups headed to Naruto's room. Anko turned to them, "What are you guys wanting to do?" Hana and Shiho shared a look, with Hana shrugging, "I wouldn't mind getting something light, sensei," Shiho supplied as Hana nodded in agreement. "Cool, even if Naruto wants to head out, he's been outvoted." "So, Anko smiled letting out a yawn, "besides the little shit managed to land his late-night ramen bill on me last night." Hana laughed at her misfortune, a gleam in her eye as an idea came to her instantly. "Well, you know what that means then, sensei. He's paying for the breakfast." Her proclamation caused their sensei to burst out into loud laugh, not caring about those sleeping in the rooms they passed. Shiho giggled quietly whilst still being embarrassed at her sensei's lack of manners. As they approached their teammates' room, Shiho raised her hand to knock only for the door to slide open. "What's got you so happy at this time, sensei?" Naruto asked. Hana took over the role of laughing as their sensei held a cruel smirk on her face. "You're covering the breakfast bill, Uzumaki." At Hana's statement, Naruto tried to laugh it off by raising his hands in slight protest, only for their sensei to reach forward and snatch the boy with his collar, putting him into her signature headlock as she began marching to the hotel lobby. Shiho smiled at their antics. If Anko-sensei and Naruto decided to stop being ninja, they could become traveling comedians, as there was never a dull moment with the two. Despite the nice thought, Shiho's smile fell and let out a sigh as she looked Naruto's room. "You could have at least put the futon back, Naruto-kun," Shiho called out. The boy's muffled protests were all that answered her. XXX. Ayame took her time as she climbed the steps to Naruto's apartment. 3 days had gone by since he had gone off on his mission outside the village, and surprisingly, they had gone by rather quickly. Not as if she was keeping track or anything like that. Before he left, he had dropped his keys off at her home, asking her to check on his apartment if he wasn't back for a while and to water his plants. A small smile formed onto her face as she thought about his hobby. If someone had told her years ago that Naruto Uzumaki would develop a green thumb, she would have laughed in their face. Back then, he could hardly keep still for a minute, always being a nuisance before her father's scolding set him straight. As she turned the key to the door, she was greeted by a floral aroma that felt ingrained into the apartment's walls. As she made her way down the hallway, it only grew stronger, as if welcoming her in. Sitting at the far end of the room, in front of the glass balcony door, was a comically large plant pot basking in the sunlight from outside. She smiled as she read the label on the pot's rim. "Jasmine" was scribbled in his messy handwriting, and the fragrance beckoned her to lean in to smell the budding white flowers. She peered through the screen glass, happy to see the hectically organized plants were still growing strong. Her eyes zoned in on the bright purple irises, her favorite flower, and every time she saw them, she could swear they were getting brighter and brighter. A small part of her wondered if he took extra care of them because he knew they were her favorite, but she shook the thought off for the absurdness of it all as she looked at the sea of colors that surrounded them. He took care of them all equally. She zoned back in on the pot in front of her, lifting the already full watering can next to it to start the reason why she was there in the first place. She poured only a little water on the jasmines, having done it enough times with him around to understand when enough was enough. Once she had overwatered white lilies, which Naruto had nagged on and on for about a week before eventually dragging her back to the apartment to show her how it was done properly. At the time she had called him a dork for it, but looking back on it now she found it cute. As she opened the balcony door to continue watering, her stuck on the blonde shinobi. With him not being around as often, she had begun to miss him during the boring shifts and the busy ones. He wasn't there to add his charm to the mundane tasks that came with running the stand or wind up her father when he felt like pushing his buttons. It wasn't as if she didn't see him every day either. He would sometimes appear in the mornings and help them open up before he would be off to meet with his team. Other days it would be after he completed his missions, or even during them when he forced his team to have lunch at the stand. The fact he had managed to make friends that wasn't just her made her happy as well. When Shiho first came by at the start of the year, she was unsure of what she didn't know, but it quickly subsided as Shiho eventually became her friend also. Even though it took him 4 years to get a friend, it was still great to see. Now with him being on Team 9, he, and by association her, had managed to have another friend in Hana along with having a mentor in Anko. As she continued thinking about him, a weight settled in her chest. He had only been a shinobi for a month and yet he was already moving on in his career as his sensei saw them fit enough to take missions outside of Konoha, which meant that his promise to her would always be on her mind at all times. She had known it would happen before he had even graduated from the academy, but the reality of it settling in brought forth something she hadn't paid attention to since she had known him. His recent absences and surprise appearances had her feelings for the blonde shift in ways she wouldn't have thought of before now. Every time she sees him now, it's as if the air around him takes on a different quality. There's a flutter in her chest when he laughs with her. Her face hurts from the smiling he causes her to do. When he would tell her of his day, she would take in every word as if it was gospel. At first, she dismissed these sensations as mere excitement now that he was a shinobi. But now, as she cared for his plants, thinking about him, and reminiscing the memories she had of him, she couldn't deny the truth that dawned on her. She loved him. She loved him for the way he made her feel, for the times they spent together laughing over small things, the memories they had from the good times of him trying to teach her how to throw kunai, running around the forests on Konoha way past her curfew, and even to the bad times where she would watch him try to act as if people's attitude towards him didn't bother him. She admired his tenacity and resolve in those times though, and it was what inspired her every day to move on in life and not care what others thought and stick by him. However, despite her emotions, she was petrified to even act on them. He was her only friend, and the question of whether Naruto saw her only as a friend was frightening. The thought of confessing felt freeing but also constrictive. Despite her emotions, she was scared to act on them. What if he only saw her as a friend? Messing the friendship they had would be unbearable. Yet, the thought of her confessing her feelings left her feeling weightless. As she made her way back inside, setting the watering can down, she made a silent vow to herself to find the courage to act on her feelings. If he only saw her as a friend, then she would continue to be someone he could rely on whenever he needed her, but if he also shared the same feelings as her, then she would make sure that she dedicated herself fully to the new step in their relationship. With a newfound sense of purpose, she left his apartment, locking the door behind her. The weight from before now felt lighter, as a quiet determination now replaced it. XXX. Hana's amusement never left her face as they sat awaiting their breakfast. Across from her, Shiho sat similarly enjoying the situation. The bill had come to a hefty amount for a breakfast, but the Ninkin had to eat as well, and their sensei had pointed out that they would need gruel for the road, so as the old lady who ran the humble cafe set off with their order, the blonde Uzumaki didn't feel too happy. "You could have at least got the mutts food to share, you know," he grumbled as he rested his hand on his cheek. Almost as a laugh, the 3 dogs at her feet barked at his rude remark. "Well, maybe next time you'll think twice about trying to pull a fast one on me, huh?" Their sensei chimed in. Hana could tell by the look on his face that he was putting on his frustration at this point, if the smirk he tried to hide in his palm was any consideration. The woman came back with a pot of tea and a few cups before leaving again, opting for Anko to pour the tea for the table. As she sipped her tea and let out a relaxed sigh, she leaned over towards Naruto, a manic smile on her face. "You know, once we're back in Konoha, I'm thinking about upping your training." "Yeah?" Naruto didn't match her smile, but his gaze sharpened as he leaned closer. "What are you planning, sensei?" Hana turned to her Ninkin, ignoring the conversation that would no doubt take longer than needed, and began petting them. Shiho also turned to them, smiling at the interaction. "What are you doing once we're home, Hana-chan?" Besides Anko-sensei no doubt giving us more relentless training, she thumbed over to the conversation next to her. "I think my ma is wanting me to help Kiba with training his pup." Shiho smiled. How's Kiba-kun been enjoying the academy? Her question received a loud bark of laughter along with a shake of her head. The runt hasn't stopped complaining about how boring it is. Shiho giggled, her eyes briefly looking at Naruto. He sounds like Naruto. The days when Funano-sensei would drone on about shinobi history, he would always complain about it. Yeah, I was in the same boat. She finished patting the dogs as she noticed their food coming to the table. What are you doing when you get back? Their breakfast was placed in front of them. The full table thanked the lady before going back to their separate conversations, Shiho herself looking at the ceiling pondering her plans. I think I might go see the new Princess Gale movie that came out last month. Hana snorted, a teasing tone to her voice. Seriously? You like those movies? Shiho shrugged, smiling back unfazed at Hana's tone. Yeah, they're fun, you can come with me if you'd want to. I dunno, never been a big fan of movies if I'm honest, Hana replied, taking a bite of her grilled fish. Well, if you do decide to come, I'll pay, Shiho smiled, taking a sip of her soup, and if you like it, you can pay for the next one whenever it comes out. Whilst Hana mulled over the offer, Enko and Naruto were still in conversation about training next to them. However, both conversations paused as the door to the cafe opened, a chime of a bell sounded out across the cafe. Their training of always making sure of their surroundings kicked in as the newcomers appeared in the doorway, donned in single-sleeved black cloaks with red cloud patterns adjourned across it. Both figures' faces were hidden by the large straw hats that obscured their faces from being seen. Kukuku, the atmosphere at the table shifted immediately as their sensei's hand went straight to her neck, a troubled look on her face as she eyed the front figure at the doorway. Their hand lifted to push the straw hat up, revealing a set of gold snake-like eyes that bore down on Team 9, immediately provoking a fight-or-flight response from them. I thought I felt your presence nearby, Enko-chan, the newcomer said, their voice full of twisted delight. You even brought along your little genin, how wonderful. A tongue snaked its way out of the person's mouth as he licked at his lips, like a predator eyeing its prey. Team 9 was too frozen to move, the dogs beneath Hana's feet were shaking, also being affected by the aura the figure gave off. The other cloaked figure behind him, standing outside the cafe, hadn't moved at all, only observing from the slits in the straw hat. Hana's breathing grew heavy, the answer to Shiho's proposal lost in her throat as the new situation unraveled. Across from her, Shiho gripped at the table to try and steady her shakes, and even Naruto, who was next to her, was clenching his fists. A kunai held in one showed he was at least slightly ready for something worse to happen. Enko let out a shout of fury, before hailing a barrage of shuriken at the entrance, not even turning to them as she charged the figure. You three get yourselves out of here. Now. Her action caused them to snap out of their funk. Naruto turned to them and nodded before running out of the cafe, with Enko set on fleeing once they had left. Enko's hail of shuriken had caused laughter to escape the man as he jumped back onto the main road, his partner standing eerily still at the cafe entrance, not even stopping Enko as she made to attack. As the girls followed Naruto to the doorway, they heard the voice of Enko's opponent call out to his partner. I'm sure you can keep the children interested whilst I catch up with my old student, Itachi-kun. The name drop of the new opponent caused Enko to turn her eyes away from her opponent to look wide-eyed at the man standing next to her genin. Her call was cut off as her opponent appeared next to her and kicked her halfway down the street, her body bouncing along the cobblestone path. Naruto, being the first to the door, turned to the man, now named Itachi. He quickly positioned himself so that Hana, Shiho and the Ninken could get out of the door whilst he himself threw a kunai at the man, followed up by a kick to the stomach. His eyes bulged out of his head as the man easily moved his head to the side, dodging the kunai before raising his hand up to grab his foot. It was then Itachi's hat raised slightly, allowing for a set of red spinning eyes to stare back at him, almost glowing from beneath the hat. Since you've already caused a commotion, I guess I'll have to make sure you don't make it worse. The monotonous voice of Itachi spoke from beneath the high cloak, tossing Naruto's foot down to the ground. At least it allows us a chance to gauge the ability of the Jinchuriki, no doubt Leader Sama will be interested in that. As he finished speaking, Hana and Shiho could only watch on as Itachi repaid Naruto's kick with one of his own, this time too fast for them to keep up with, as they could only watch on as Naruto let out a grunt of pain as he sailed backwards into the cafe. Hana and Shiho once again stood still, unable to process their situation. Moments ago, they were conversing about regular things and looking forward to be going home and completing their first mission outside of the village, but now as the red eyes of the man in front of them spun in their direction, they both shared the same feeling. They might not make it home. XXX. Naruto's head spun as he moved to stand, wincing at the sharp pain that came from his ribs. No doubt, a bruise was already starting to form from that kick, or worse. He couldn't dwell on the pain, knowing he had little time to rejoin the fight. The only issue was that he instantly realized these guys were out of his league. If his sensei's reaction to them was any consideration, they might be out of her league too. That thought scared him. Scanning his surroundings, he spotted the back door to the cafe he had been booted into. All the civilians in the front of the store had fled, but his eyes met the old lady who had taken their order. She sat wide-eyed underneath a prepping table, staring at him. Realizing she was in harm's way, the man who had attacked him entered the front of the store. He had to act fast to get the old lady out of danger. Although he was in a dangerous situation and last night his sensei had warned him about seeking out fights, Naruto couldn't help the giddy sensation that flowed through him. Yes, he was scared, but he would finally be able to find out how he fares in a real combat situation. So, despite the situation he found himself in, his heart began beating like a wardroom and his blood began fueling the energy to go all out. First save the woman, he instructed himself. Faster than he thought he was capable of, he tossed a smoke bomb through the service window. The smoke quickly pillowed the front of the cafe, allowing him to snatch the old lady up and charge to the back door. Once she was clear of the area, then he would test himself. Bursting through the door led him to a back alley connecting nearby stores, with trash cans lining the entire alleyway. He turned to sprint to the main street and drop the lady off, only to find the cloaked figure already there, waiting for him. There's no use in running from me. Despite the thundering heartbeat in his ears, he could hear the man as if he was whispering into his ear, "You will only prolong your fate." That, he thought defiantly, turning the opposite way and pulsing chakra to his feet, adding extra for the weight of the woman in his arms, and launched himself onto the roofs. Once his feet landed, he wasted no time charging forwards once more. A small glance back showed that the man wasn't following him. However, upon turning back around, he was standing right in front of him once more. This guy was fast. Too fast, and Naruto was only putting this woman's life in more danger. He should have just left her in the cafe, but he didn't know if the man was going to unleash a destructive jutsu within the place to hurt him. "Why are you attacking us?" he shouted to the eerily still man, his straw hat keeping his face hidden. "My partner is difficult to keep under control." There was movement under the cloak as the man pulled an arm out of the neck, allowing him to undo half of the buttons on his cloak, letting his arm rest out. "So, while he checks up on his old student, I'm left to make sure you guys don't interfere." Naruto's gaze narrowed as the figure reached up, casually tossing the straw hat to the side, revealing his face. Naruto's eyes widened as he took in the appearance of the attacker. The man before him wore a slashed Konoha forehead protector, signifying his broken ties with the village. His gaze traveled over the high collar of the cloak, meeting the other man's unusual eyes. The crimson of the man's eyes was intense, giving off an aura of superiority as he looked into them. His pupil was surrounded by 3 tomo that were spinning in a hypnotizing way. The man's words and appearance finally hit him. If Enko was facing off against her old sensei, then that meant that these guys were at least Jonin level, both hailing from Konoha. The red eyes that captured him with his stare sent an icy feeling of dread to his stomach. This guy was the one who wiped out his clan in a single night, only just 2 years ago, mowing down innocent civilians and experienced shinobi. Worst of all, he did it when he was the same age as he was now. The thought sent tingles through his body. The guy standing before him was Uchiha Itachi. The shaking of the woman in his arms drew him back to reality, managing to tear his gaze away from those piercing crimson eyes. As he refocused on the elderly woman, a crow caught his eye, perched on a ladder that led down to the streets below. The ominous caw of the crow seemed to resonate with the gravity of the situation. Naruto, feeling a renewed surge of determination, gently placed the woman on her feet. He shot her a reassuring smile, attempting to ease the fear etched on her face. "Sorry for the scare, Granny," he whispered, the gravity of the situation reflected in the sincerity of his words. The woman, albeit still visibly shaken, scuttled away as fast as her old bones would let her. Naruto turned back to face Itachi, his heart rate continuing to skyrocket as he awaited what was about to unfold. The air around them seemed to thicken with tension, the atmosphere growing heavy as the reality of facing the notorious Uchiha Itachi sank in. The crow, perched on the ladder, observed the unfolding scene with a watchful eye. Its presence added an eerie touch to the moment. Naruto's breath hung in the air, and every passing second seemed to stretch into an eternity as he stood. More crows descended from the darkening sky, their glossy feathers glinting ominously in the muted light. Itachi, shrouded in a cloak of crows, revealed the depth of his connection to these avian creatures. Naruto's eyes widened with realization. These were Itachi's summons, much like Anko-sensei and her snakes. The crows descended upon Naruto, their wings creating a symphony of ominous rustling. The swarm surrounded him, engulfing him in a flurry of feathers and darkness. Naruto felt an otherworldly chill, and the world around him seemed to warp and twist. The sensation was eerie, like being trapped in a nightmare woven by the crows. A realization struck him: he was caught in a powerful genjutsu. Panic surged as Naruto struggled to break free. Desperation etched his face as he bit down on his lip, drawing blood in an attempt to snap out of the illusion. But nothing changed. The crows continued their dance around him. In a frantic move, he drove a kunai into his leg, seeking the shock of pain to shatter the illusion's hold. Thankfully, with that, Naruto broke free. The darkness lifted, and he found himself once again standing across from Itachi. The Uchiha, seemingly unfazed, observed Naruto with an unreadable expression. The crows had dispersed, leaving only one, perched ominously upon the man's shoulder. Despite his ordeal, Naruto's resolve remained unbroken. He panted heavily, beads of sweat trickling down his forehead. He wasn't the best with genjutsu, and he didn't fare much better breaking out of them, so he couldn't afford to be ensnared by Itachi's genjutsu again. Taking the lead this time, Naruto charged forward, his gaze fixed below Itachi's chin, deliberately avoiding eye contact. He now knew the danger that lurked within those Sharingan eyes. With a series of seals, Naruto built up chakra in his lungs and shot a few bullets of wind towards the Uchiha. The man responded with the subtlest movement of his head, effortlessly dodging the two attacks. Naruto cursed himself. His aim was off due to the nerves running through his body, but he couldn't let it fail him. Pressing on, unleashing a barrage of shuriken and kunai from various angles. The weapons glittered in the daylight as they soared through the air, aiming to draw first blood. The crow on Itachi's shoulder flew off into the sky, freeing itself from the danger. Once again, however, the man's posture didn't change as he sidestepped the incoming projectiles, only reaching out to nab two of the shuriken into his fingers, quickly returning them back to their sender. Naruto turned his head as fast as he could, only receiving a slash across his cheek, still pressing the man. Instantly he brought two kunai in his hands and begun implementing his taijutsu on the man. The kunai slashing his upwards arcs to the man's throat, with a few knees coming up to try hit the man in the gut. Itachi continued to effortlessly dodge Naruto's attacks, moving with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. The Uchiha remained composed, not throwing any counterattacks, and Naruto felt the frustration welling up within him. Gritting his teeth, he couldn't shake the feeling of being toyed with by the powerful figure before him. The taijutsu exchange intensified, with Naruto's every strike met by Itachi's evasive maneuvers. The air crackled with tension as the dance between the two unfolded. Naruto, fueled by a mix of determination and irritation, pressed on, each movement deliberate and forceful. Frustration swelled within him as he jumped back, creating distance. Chakra built up in his lungs and throat once again, this time taking a page out of his sensei's book. Overcharging the chakra in his throat, he spat forth a sea of fire phoenixes that flew towards the Uchiha. Itachi was forced to move from his position as he darted in and out of the swarm of fire, continuing to show off his skills and further infuriate the blonde. Naruto made to attempt another jutsu, but his hands were clamped down by his attacker who had flickered in front of him. Now it's my turn. Itachi, taking control of the situation, sent a chakra-infused knee into Naruto's stomach, lifting him effortlessly into the air. The blonde ninja gasped as the impact forced the air from his lungs. Itachi, with a fluidity reminiscent of a dance, began a sequence of kicks, juggling Naruto in the air. Each strike was precise, each movement deliberate, showcasing the Uchiha's skill. Naruto, helpless in the onslaught, felt his body battered and tossed like a ragdoll. Itachi's capoeira-style assault was a display of both grace and ruthless efficiency. As Naruto hovered in the air, Itachi abruptly disappeared, only to reappear behind him. With a powerful dropkick, he slammed Naruto down onto the rooftop, causing it to cave in. The force of the impact sent Naruto tumbling down into the shop below. The dust settled, revealing Naruto coughing up blood on the floor of the damaged shop. His vision swam, and every breath felt like a struggle. Through the haze, he focused on the hole in the roof. His opponent's eyes flashed for a moment, filled with an ominous gleam. Itachi descended into the damaged shop, landing above the battered Naruto. The Uchiha, without a second thought, unleashed a series of devastating blows. His strikes were a blur, a symphony of calculated attacks. Itachi's fists and kicks landed with precision, leaving Naruto defenseless against the relentless assault. Naruto's body convulsed with each hit, pain radiating through every fiber of his being. He struggled to maintain consciousness, his vision blurring further with each passing moment. Itachi's eyes remained fixed on Naruto, the intensity in them only growing as he continued the brutal beatdown in the wreckage of the shop. His attacks ended with Itachi standing above Naruto, his stoic visage unchanged by the chaos he had caused. Naruto gazed up, defiant yet exhausted. Itachi's cold voice cut through the air, causing Naruto's eyes to widen. Is that all the container of the Nine Tails has to offer? Naruto lay shook as the new information hit him, watching on as Itachi reached down to his own pouch and took a kunai from him, his eyes glowing with an intent that sent a shiver down his spine. The cold glint of the blade reflected in those red eyes and Naruto realized that it was the end. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The closer the kunai got to his throat, the more Naruto realized it truly was the end. His first mission out of Fire Country would be his last, and the fact made his blood boil. His mind was occupied with the agreement of becoming Team 9's main assault specialist, with the promise to protect them when situations turned to times like these. He wasn't good enough. He thought of the promise he made to Ayame and Tsuki after he had graduated. His promise would be broken if he didn't go back. They would never forgive him. As the feeling of imminent death drew closer and closer, his last feeling wasn't one of fear. Instead, a searing hot rage consumed him, anger at allowing Itachi, someone not that older than him, to hold this much power over him. Anger at the years of pretending not to care and shrug everything off without a care in the world, and finally anger at himself for not doing everything he could have done. This torrent of raw emotion fueled the thunderous anger in his chest. A guttural scream erupted from him, echoing through the area, and as the sound reverberated, Naruto's vision turned a fiery red. The primal scream proved to be a force to be reckoned with. As Itachi, taken aback by its intensity, leapt backward instinctively, creating distance between them. Naruto's mind was fogged over by his growing rage, his vision bubbling over by the red chakra that spewed out of his skin, coating him in a cloak of red-tailed beast chakra. In that moment, Naruto's mind was set on one thing and one thing only. To break every bone in that man's body. XXX. Enko couldn't believe the situation they were in. Moments ago, the streets of Yugakure were peaceful, bustling with everyday activity. Now, it had become a battlefield, with civilians fleeing in terror, their screams echoing down the streets. Her sensei hadn't aged a bit since the last time she saw him, his skin forever that pale white, but it still looked younger, her own skin a chilling reminder of the chase of immortality he had been so fanatical about. She had already spotted a few Yugakure shinobi clearing the area, but she knew that there wasn't a single person in this village that could handle the vile man before her. She dodged another swarm of snakes, sending a fire jutsu back, allowing her to use its cover to scan the area and spot her genin. Hana and Shiho were still standing back to back outside the cafe, desperately defending themselves from attacks from Itachi Uchiha. She saw a few cuts on their skin, glad for the unknown reason for the boy playing with them life food and not outright killing them. She couldn't fail them so early in their careers. Naruto was nowhere to be seen, and the thought struck her hard. Was Orochimaru here to take her for more experiments regarding the curse mark, or was he here for Naruto? The question itself made her ire grow at the situation they've found themselves in. The thought of her losing the team already, coupled with the idea of Naruto falling into Orochimaru's hands, was unbearable. Bastard! She screamed, launching a barrage of shuriken and kunai from her sleeves. The shuriken flew in a way that it would prevent him from moving away from the kunai aimed for his vitals. It would have worked if he was an ordinary being, that is, as his body constricted and reshaped itself to pass unharmed. Is that any way to speak to your sensei, Anko-chan? Orochimaru teased, sidestepping another attack. You've grown, but you still lack finesse. Another wave of snakes accompanied his words. Quickly she placed her hands onto the ground and formed a high earth wall, allowing for the snakes to pass around. As she prepared for another jutsu, the ground beneath her broke apart and Orochimaru broke out, a sword in his mouth pinned for her jugular. Raising her forearm guard, she angled it to deflect the blade's path. Pain shot through her as the sword managed to slash through the metal. Years of practicing with her own poisons told her the sword was laced with a fast-acting toxin. The burning sensation under her skin was unmistakable. Like I said, you lack finesse. His words were punctuated by a forceful kick to her stomach, sending her flying into a building behind her. Despite the pain, she couldn't afford to give him a moment's respite. She quickly got to her feet, swallowing an antidote as she charged back out. She was beaten to the punch by two Yugakure shinobi who stepped in front of her. One of them was the woman from the gate yesterday morning. She knew they both stood no chance. Before she could even shout out, the ground rumbled beneath them, and she barely managed to send a snake to pull the woman back as her ally was swallowed by a serpent. This is Orochimaru we're up against, go and warn the village higher-ups. Anko ordered. The woman's eyes widened in fear and turned to run, only for her to meet the same fate as her fellow shinobi as another snake swallowed her whole and burrowed back into the earth. It's always useful to get test subjects in times like these, Orochimaru cackled, his forked tongue flicking out as he laughed. You never know what hidden potential may be under their skin. As if to prove his point, a foul chakra made itself known in the air. Anko's fears heightened to a new level as the daunting chakra of the nine-tailed fox blanketed over the area. Her adrenaline spiked in response to the fear caused by the chakra. If he had unknowingly tapped into it, then things were bad on his end. She saw Orochimaru's eyes brighten from her spot. So, it is true that my student was given the honor of babysitting the Jinchuriki, he said, turning his attention away from her and towards the direction of the chakra. It's more intoxicating up close, he mused as if she wasn't even there. Anko pounced on the opening. Summoning every ounce of strength she had and charged forth with a speed that caused her vision to tunnel. Her hands blurred with motion as she ran through the seals required. A swarm of serpents bundled out of both her sleeves, wrapping around and constricting him. Got you, she hissed, channeling chakra into the serpents, their grip tightening as they ballooned up. Orochimaru's face writhed in discomfort at his new position, his eyes widening as he felt the chakra increasing in the snakes. Anko raised her hand in an activation seal, the snakes engulfing Orochimaru in an explosive chain reaction. She squinted through the dust kicked up by the explosion, her heart pounding with hope. But as the smoke cleared, her hope shattered. In Orochimaru's place was a sludge of mud. Before she could react, an elongated arm shot out from the ground, grabbing her by the throat and swinging her back onto the cobblestones. Blood and spittle flew from her mouth as her head racked with pain. She attempted to move but felt a swarm of snakes slither over her, squeezing her in place. She squinted through the rays of sun that were overhead, her eyes met cold slitted ones. Even after all these years you continue to be the biggest failure I've ever created. She couldn't respond if she wanted to as the man above her raised his own hand in an activation seal, her neck began to sizzle underneath the skin causing her let out a shriek of agony. The pain was worse than it had ever been with it quickly overwhelming her senses. Darkness closed in on her vision, but she managed to turn and glimpse the final sight of Hana standing alone, her Ninken and Shiho lay unmoving on the ground. Her last thought was the desperate wish for her genin to make it out of this alive. As he let loose a guttural roar, Naruto's vision blurred with the streets around him dissolving into a haze. His eyes fought against unconsciousness, still managing to see his own body moving in frantic, wild attacks towards the Uchiha. He lost the battle of consciousness as his vision faded to black, all he was left with was the thundering of his heart that deafened his ears. It felt like seconds had gone by as he lost his sight, but he was somehow forgetting why he was in this situation. What was going on? Where was he? What was he doing? Who was he? He could feel himself straining his own mind to search for answers and a whisper reached out to him in the madness. Is that all the container of the Nine Tails has to offer? His eyes snapped open, his body moving in a panic only for him to land on his rear in a pool of water. He swung his head around taking in his new surroundings and found himself in a dimly lit sewage area. He calmed his breathing and realized the searing pain he felt before was gone, the furious rage had simmered slightly as he stood up, out of the water. Looking down at the water, he was unable to see his reflection clearly as the murkiness of the water was being combined with an unknown force that began to push the pack of his calves forwards, forcing his body to trudge through the knee-deep waters. Container of the Nine Tails, Itachi's words echoed throughout the hallways, the sound itself seemed to push him forwards more into the dark ahead of him. Every step he took was heavy as he trudged deeper into the unknown. Lefts became rights and rights became lefts as the labyrinth of pipes and flowing water continued. A part of him thought it was the rogue shinobi's doing. He had caught him in another genjutsu and was just toying with his mind, using him for amusement. He wanted to kick and yell out at the Uchiha but the words that kept echoing prevented that. He knew, deep down, that the answer he had been looking for all this time awaited him at the end of this endless maze. It caused a barrel of fear and uncertainty to creep into his mind. The encounter would test his resolve as the person he had made himself to be. As he took another turn, he came across a new sight, one that set his senses on edge. In front of him was nothing but darkness. The water underneath him began to move him forwards with more force than before, as if sensing his own fear and hesitation. His hand found one of the pipes on the wall, but it did nothing in the end as the current swept him out and over the edge into the pit of black. What felt like an eternity ended in an instant as his back slammed into the water, the impact sending him surging back to the surface before he landed hard on his knees, the rippling water swirling beneath him. The black pit had transformed into an enormous, darkened chamber, and there towering above him was a colossal-sized red cage. The bars seemed to stretch on forever, disappearing into the darkness above. A large paper tag, inscribed with the kanji for seal, sat neatly in the center of the cage. His throat tightened. The Uchiha spoke no lie. He wasn't just imagining this, and he knew that this felt too real to be a trick of the mind. This was something far worse than he could ever have imagined it to be. Welcome, boy. A deep, resonant voice echoed from the darkness behind the bars, dripping with malice and disdain. His legs turned to jelly as a wave of chakra accompanied the voice, his eyes widening as two gigantic menacing eyes appeared in the darkness. They glowed crimson with sinister intent. Its slitted pupils bore down onto him, as if moving would promise his death. It rose up and stepped forwards, the water rippled violently, revealing the towering form of the nine-tailed fox. Without warning, a massive claw shot forwards, squeezing between the gaps of the cage with a deafening crash. Naruto scrambled back, falling on his rear, his eyes wide with terror. The beast's snarl turned into a bellowing roar that rattled the space around them. "You're nothing but a pathetic monkey," it sneered, its voice dripping with disdain. "To think that a worthless brat like you is the only thing standing between me and my freedom." It bared its fangs, and Naruto could feel the sheer murderous intent suffocating the air. "It disgusts me. Despite all the years of loneliness, before meeting Ayame and Tuki, back when he lashed out at the world, wondering endlessly why his life was the way it was, he had always known, deep down, that if he wanted answers, he'd have to find them himself. Now though, as the truth stared him in the face, he still couldn't help but choke out the simple question that had continued to gnaw at him for all these years. Why me? Why are you sealed in of me?" Its snarl twisted into one of mockery. "Do not think of yourself as special. You are nothing but a vessel. A cage. Your bastard Hokage sealed me within you, locking me away, treating me like some trinket to be used when needed. I was on the brink of freedom only to be caged once more, all because your kind only knows of violence and war." Naruto's mind reeled. Flashes of the lessons they were taught at the academy rushed back to him. They had been taught about the legendary battle between the Yondaime Hokage and the Nine Tails. However, when they spoke about how he successfully saved the village by defeating the monster and sacrificing his own life in the process, he never would have thought this is what they meant by defeated. "So, this is what they meant by defeated," he muttered, his small voice echoing across the chamber despite being barely above a whisper. "You were sealed, not killed." Laughter erupted, filling the chamber with a deep, rumbling sound that shook its very walls. It resonated with both mockery and pride. "Killed? Do not make me laugh, boy. No human could ever hope to kill me. Many have tried, but ultimately, the greed of your kind won out and they sought to steal my power for their own selfish needs." It felt as though there was no cage between them in that moment as the fox's head loomed closer, its eyes boring into him even more, its lips curling, exposing its maw full of razor-sharp teeth. "Your Hokage may have locked me away once more, but I tore through him and his wife like the pathetic worms they were, and I laughed as I did so, knowing that killed their chance of raising a family, raising their newborn son." The fox's head was bubbling through the gate at this point, its form shifting to get closer to Naruto's body, "The very son they sealed me inside of." The head of the fox popped and reformed back behind the cage as its final words echoed across the space. Naruto didn't pay its appearance any mind, however, as it felt as though his world had blown up in his face. His body felt as though he had the wind kicked out of him, his throat clogged full of raw emotion, so much so that it began to leak out in desperate gasps for air. The Yondaime was his father. He had sealed the fox within him. His own parents gave their own lives so that he would have to live like this. The people who were supposed to love and care for their child had left him alone, to grow up hated and ignored. To be treated as a pariah, all because he was forced to hold this thing in him. He was now only just finding out because of a freak occurrence with some rogue ninja from the very village that had shunned him for holding this demon. What was the point of it all? The fox's thoughts slithered past the bars and honeyed with his own. "They brought you into this world, only to treat you like a tool." It said, "You haven't been treated fairly all these years, whilst the man who did this is treated as a hero." A raw, bitter anger swelled within Naruto, the same feeling he felt seeing Itachi moments ago. Only this time it agreed with his mind's thoughts and his body. The cackle from the nine tails felt like velvet on his ears, a warm bubbly feeling comforted his body as his anger continued to build. Yes, that's it. Feel it. Feel the anger, the hatred. You've been left in the dark, your own feelings tossed aside just as a tool should be. Now let it out. The visage of the fox faded away as Naruto's sight turned red. The comfort he felt moments ago shifted as he began to transform. His body was being covered in the menacing chakra that leaked from behind the bars. The burning sensation was too much for his mind to comprehend, leaving him to do the only thing he could manage in that moment. AAAAGH. XXX. Outside the seal, the transformation happened too fast for even Itachi himself to understand what could have gone wrong. Moments earlier he had the Jinchuriki on the floor of a shop under a genjutsu. Then the boy began using a small amount of the fox's chakra, and while it was a surprise to see it in person, happening in real time through his Sharingan, he was disappointed in the way the power turned the boy into a mindless rage. After a small bout of the Jinchuriki trying to claw his eyes out and Itachi kicking him back repeatedly, there was a single pause in the fight as the blonde boy was booted down the cobblestone street, a trench being created as the boy's body skated across the pebbled path. That's where Itachi now found himself, feeling the extent of what a truly untrained Jinchuriki was capable of doing as the oppressive, hateful chakra smothered the area in an instant. The surrounding area around the boy burst with chakra, its effect causing the nearest walls to crack, the store windows shattered, and even Itachi himself took a step back as he looked on at the transformation the boy undertook. AAAAGH. His body twisted and contorted. His skin bubbled and peeled as volatile chakra mixed, giving way to a red and black fox-like form. Itachi's eyes narrowed. The crimson appendages that formed behind him gave Itachi the knowledge to guess just how strong the transformed Jinchuriki was going to be. 4 tails, he muttered to himself in his usual stoic tone, despite him feeling slightly tense at the rising situation. He watched the tails lash out at the land around him, carving through the stone paths like a hot knife through butter. The tails shot under the ground, causing it to crack, creating a trench that kept pushing towards Itachi. Itachi focused chakra to his legs and pounced up onto a stable section of the crumbled wall, watching on as where he once stood sunk in on itself and continued to do so down the rest of the street. Any semblance of damage control he thought he could achieve was quickly forgotten as the supports of nearby buildings collapsed under the shifting ground. Itachi sighed, already dreading the repercussions of his failure to contain the situation. If he had reined Orochimaru in from the start, this disaster might have been avoided, but he knew all too well that Orochimaru was not someone to be controlled. He focused back on the rampaging Jinchuriki, his Sharingan taking in the large gathering of chakra around the boy's form. The beginnings of a 5th tail began to flutter into existence, and Itachi knew immediately he had to act fast. His eyes transformed. To onlookers his eyes spun in a mesmerizing way, the 3 tomo pattern shifting towards the center of his eyes, creating a new spiraling curved pattern, both eyes now sporting a curved shuriken design. The Mangekyo Sharingan. Enough, he whispered, and the beast's gaze landed on his. As if sensing the immediate danger, it focused all its tails on him. Most in his position would have been torn apart and turned into red mist, but his eyes allowed him to see the trajectory of the chakra tails and move to dodge them, finding the single path to not get pierced by them. The white eerie eyes had turned away from him, the knowledge of the Sharingan's power not forgotten despite the beast's behavior, but Itachi spun in between 2 of the tails, kicking off the ground and vaulting, using his hand to avoid another tail attempting to pierce his back. He threw his hands into a quick seal, a shadow clone appearing to his left just as he landed onto his feet. Both taking different sides to attack. The clone charged left, throwing the most powerful fire jutsu it could towards the Jinchuriki line of sight, allowing the real Itachi to use it as cover. However, the boy was unbothered and let out a howl that sent forth a powerful gust of wind that split the jutsu apart, catching Itachi trying to get behind him. His clone's foot was damaged, causing it to dispel into smoke, the chakra and memories returning to him as it did so. The slight memory feedback caused him a near miss with one of the tails. The chakra was so powerful that it gave off a heat. Immediately he backpedaled, this time fleeing up into what used to be an apartment. The decision to do so worked perfectly as Itachi was now the one being pressed instead, and he knew that the boy, or thing, would slip up in his enraged state. He found himself sprinting down a narrow corridor, the sunlight shining down on him, lighting his way from a hole in the roof. Turning into a bathroom, he found a situation to exploit. Inside the bathroom was a couple holding onto each other for dear life. As his eyes found them, they let out a scream, thinking he was going to finish them off. Instead, Itachi positioned himself in the corner opposite them, knowing he had seconds to pull his idea off. Unlike himself, the Jinchuriki burst through the wall of the bathroom, sending shards of tiles everywhere and electing louder screams from the couple across from him. He paid the mess no mind as the Jinchuriki stalled momentarily at the new sight, its tails uncaring and flickering towards the couple. However, it froze immediately. The small space going silent as Itachi stared into its blinding white eyes, using the mirror that was barely hanging onto the wall opposite of where they entered from, catching the Jinchuriki off guard. The silence was broken with the whisper of Tsukuyomi. Its effects were immediate. The chakra cloak around Naruto's bod began to recede into itself. As the transformation dissipated, it revealed the heavily burned form of the boy beneath, his clothing gone, leaving his blistered, red body to fall unceremoniously onto the messy floor beneath him. As the effects of the Tsukuyomi flooded his mind, Itachi held no sympathy for him if he were to wake up, as the agony that would greet him would teach him a lesson. Itachi's hadn't managed to get out of the situation unharmed as the blinding aftereffects that unleashed behind his eyes caused him to wince and adjust his breathing momentarily. The mirror he used to catch the boy off guard allowed him to see the tears of blood that leaked from his eyes. The power of the Mangekyo put immense strain on the body, but he couldn't let it show, especially now of all times. He quickly rubbed away the blood from his cheeks and moved forwards, stepping over the corpses of the people that had allowed him to catch the Jinchuriki off guard, and grabbed the boy by the hair, leaping out of the hole in the wall and landing back in the destroyed street below. As he tossed the boy in the trench, created by his own destruction, a soft applause broke out behind him, drawing Itachi's gaze towards its source. Orochimaru emerged from the alleyway across the road from the apartment he had just came from, his expression one of twisted delight as he looked on at the situation. His purple-haired student was unconscious at his feet also. No doubt the man wanted to conduct some more experiments on the woman. To think that the legends were true, Orochimaru said with glee, his eyes trailing from the unconscious Jinchuriki to his Sharingan. To subdue a crazed Jinchuriki with just a glance. Very remarkable. Itachi's eyes narrowed at the Sanin's words. We wouldn't be in this situation if you had held your tongue, Orochimaru. He glanced around at the surrounding area. Pain will not be pleased with the attention we have attracted. Especially since we were explicitly told to lay low and continue to bringing in funds and information to the meetings. Orochimaru's demeanor shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing at the mention of pain. Well, we managed to capture one of the Jinchuriki years in advance. His tongue flicked out, licking his lips. I believe that if I study the Jinchuriki, I can create a counter to his seal, allowing us to keep him and his kind in storage until we are ready to go through with Pain's end goal. Taking the Jinchuriki here and now would only cause Konoha to send out a manhunt for the boy. The village wouldn't stop until they regained the 9 tails and caught the people responsible for it. Something they knew all too well. Itachi steeled himself for where this situation was going. We were laying low for a reason, Orochimaru. As if to assist his argument, shouts of the small shinobi force that still occupied Yugakure began calling out to each other near their location. Pain didn't want the Akatsuki on the map just yet, something you've gone and managed to ruin in under an hour. As I said, Pain will not be pleased. The snake found amusement in the young Uchiha's words. The deep unnerving laugh filled the silence of the street. If that's the case, then I believe it's time for me to forge my own path once again, he said, his laughter fading to a dangerous tone. The buildup of the chakra in the Sanin's body was as clear as day to Itachi's eyes. He didn't know if Orochimaru thought he was above him in skills or he had simply let his emotions guide his actions, but the Uchiha didn't let the man follow through on his plan as he quickly pinned him in a genjutsu and drew his tanto, aiming directly for the Sannin's neck. But Orochimaru, ever the slippery adversary, managed to evade the attack at the last moment, breaking out of the genjutsu. Itachi's Mangekyo tracked the movement with precision. The snake was fast enough to get his arm up, using the limb as a shield against the incoming attack. A grunt of pain escaped Orochimaru as he created space between them, his eyes immediately moving away from the red eyes. "You little brat," Orochimaru spat, a mixture of anger and pain in his voice. Itachi kept his gaze steadily focused on the man, not allowing him to attempt anything if he could prevent it. "Not only have you made a mess of the Akatsuki's original plans, but you've now turned your back on the organization itself, Orochimaru. Hopefully, Pain will forgive my failure here if I bring him your head." The pained look vanished from the Sannin's face as his body turned a shade of brown and melted into the ground. Itachi's eyes already pinning the alleyway he appeared from in the beginning, a mocking laughter echoing out into the open. "I'd like to see you try, Itachi-kun. XXX. The chittering cold wind swept through the small narrow streets of the snow-covered town. The only people out on the street were those far too inebriated to feel the effects of the cold and Shizune herself, who was currently clutching her cloak to her chest not wanting the heat to escape. Her breath escaped in a frosty cloud as she darted down the street, her eyes scanning every bar along the way. She and her master had been staying in this small little trading town on the outskirts of Shimogakure for the past week and a half after her master's gambling debts had caught up to her once again. So, after managing to board a ship from the eastern coast of the Land of Fire, they managed to find themselves 2 countries away from the debtors. "I wish they stopped at Yugakure. Their hot springs would be leaps better than this," she thought as she stopped at the last bar on the street, letting out a sigh of relief as she spotted the woman she was looking for, sitting in the corner of the dimly lit bar. With a glass of sake in one hand and her other occupied the lever of a slot machine. "There you are, Tsunade-sama," Shizune called out, entering the bar, and relishing in the warmth of the building. Tsunade barely moved, a grunt in her direction was her way of a greeting. She made her way across the room, the smell of the bar invaded her nostrils, a mix of smoke and stale liquor made her teeth tighten slightly at the harshness of it. No matter how many times they found themselves in these places, she never did get used to it. As she moved across the room, the handful of men who sat scattered across the tables paid her a glance and then focused back onto their own games at their table. Her master's glass was almost empty, as well as the few bottles that were piling up on the side table next to the slot machine. "Tsunade-sama," she said again, quieter this time as she approached the bar trying to get her master's full attention, but the older woman's eyes were glued to the machine watching the slots spin rapidly, the flashing lights lighting her face and reflecting in her honey brown eyes. A small shake of her shoulder got her to turn to her student, her eyes rapidly blinking away the dry eye. "Shizune, is it morning already?" Shizune couldn't help but sigh at the question. "No, but you should come back to the hotel now, you've been at it for hours." Their hotel room wasn't far, but she knew that the next bar they passed she would attempt to go in despite having already spent most of their money that was supposed to last them for a while. She also didn't want to leave Taunton in the room alone any longer than she needed. Her piglet was well behaved on most occasions, but if their accommodation found out they had snuck a pig into their room, they would probably have to pay a fee and get kicked out, resulting in more money being lost. "Fine," she said, standing up and finishing what was left in her cup as well as pulling down on the lever of the machine for a final spin. Another thing she would never get used to was the amount of ryo her master would use on a single spin on these machines, her face paling slightly as she realized she just spun the cost for 2 nights in a nice hotel. Her face switched up as the sudden dinging noise that came from the slot machine was accompanied by the rattling of ryo. The earlier uninterested patrons turned their gaze over to their spot. Shizune's eyes widened more as her mind calculated the prize multiplier her master had just won. Tsunade herself frowned at the money spilling out of the machine, her lips pressing into a thin line. Great, he muttered, the sarcastic edge in her voice unmistakable. Despite the hefty payout, there was no excitement, no joy, only a sense of foreboding. Shizune blinked, torn between relief at the new wealth her master had just accumulated for them, the exact opposite of what she's known for, and anxiety at the shift in her demeanor. Tsunade-sama, are you okay? Isn't this a good thing? Tsunade didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to scan the rest of the room, her experienced eyes flickering over everyone at the bar. She had learned that good things are often accompanied by worse things, and she wasn't in the mood for what was bound to follow her good luck. As her gaze lingered on the patrons, her hand moved to her liver, glowing a bright green. In an instant her body had burned off the alcohol in her system, the effects leaving her and returning her to her normal state. Shizune saw the shift in her master's demeanor. It wasn't one she saw very often, only having ever seen it a handful of times since going on the road with her. When it appeared, it usually meant that they were about to end up in some bother, either Tsunade herself starting it or the trouble finding them. We're leaving now, she said, her chair scraping against the wooden floor as she snatched up her green haori from the back of the seat and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders. The other patrons at this point were getting uncomfortable by the blonde lady's gaze upon them and chose to look away. Shizune was still shocked by the sudden turn of the events, leaving. But Taunton and our things are still at the hotel. Tsunade was already moving to the door, the jackpot money left behind as she went. Go back to the hotel and pack. We're not staying in this town a second longer. Shizune wasn't one to argue with her master, knowing it would fall on deaf ears anyways, especially when Tsunade got like this. The strange curse of misfortune that she preached that followed her had not proved itself to be false over the years, despite Shizune wanting it to be proven so. It did hurt, however, as she looked down at the pile of coins still spilling out onto the floor, the machine's chime punctuating it even further. She grabbed a pouch and quickly filled it with as much as she could from the winnings before setting off after her master into the bitter cold. XXX. The hospital was shrouded in its usual atmosphere of dread and sorrow. Its halls had very few moments of happiness and joy, and Hirazen's very own presence as he entered through the sliding doors was far from lifting the mood, only seeming to deepen the tension as the rhythmic tapping of his cane echoes through the sterile hallways. He had no need to check in as he strode purposefully through the reception and through the double doors that were being guarded by two chunin, who gave him a bow as he passed. As the doors swung behind him, he felt his appearance fall, a slight tiredness showing on his old face as he continued forward. The past week had been one of the most hectic weeks he's had since he took back the seat of Hokage 13 years ago. The incident in Yugakure involving his shinobi, both current and rogue, had kept him in his office for most of the week as he had to deal with the fallout of the incident. An out-of-control Jinchuriki and two rogue shinobi destroying a tourist area in a demilitarized zone was a difficult situation he had to dig himself out of. All he aimed to do was make sure that the Yugakure officials came to a peaceful and fair agreement and try mop up the mess that was made. Thankfully, the negotiations were going as smooth as they could be, allowing him a moment away from his office so he could visit the hospital, leaving his old teammates to finalize the agreement in his stead. However, it seemed as the world refused to give him a moment of respite as a second tapping of a cane accompanied his own, causing him to let out a sigh at the person who was in his shadow. This was just the man he could count on showing his face when he really didn't want to deal with him. Something to say, Danzo? He asked, not even breaking his stride nor offering a glance behind at the one-eyed man. There is no point in me wasting my breath as you clearly know what I am here to say. Danzo replied, his voice a low rasp. Hiruzen gave a small humorless chuckle, his eyes fixed ahead as he turned a corner. If that's the case, then my answer is still the same one that I gave you all those years ago. He turned a single-eyed glance at the bandaged man. You are not training the boy. Danzo moved slightly faster to fall in line with the Hokage, his cane tapping alongside Hiruzen's as if they were in an argument of their own. The boy is our Jinchuriki. After the fox broke out of its previous Jinchuriki, I would have thought you would have seen reason. You should have ensured that the next Jinchuriki was trained as they are supposed to be, as a weapon for the village. Konoha has never needed to rely on the strength of our Jinchuriki, and you know that. His tone firm and annoyed at having this conversation various times throughout the year. I made sure that Minato and Kushina's sacrifice wasn't repaid by turning their own child into a weapon. They turned once again, and at the far end of the hallway stood the door to Naruto's hospital room. Correct. Danzo said, the edge in his voice becoming more pronounced. We have never needed the strength of our Jinchuriki, but times are changing, Hiruzen. This attack, accidental or not, proves it. We're lucky that the Jinchuriki came back to us alive. Danzo turned his eye to the side of Hiruzen's head, as if to bore a hole through him, and we are wasting the sacrifice of the Yondaime and his wife by not using the weapon they left us. Danzo's statement caused Hiruzen to stop and flick his cane out in front of him, blocking him from moving closer to the door. The gesture was small, but he knew that it would irritate Danzo slightly, making it a slight win in his book. His eyes looked through the small window on the door, allowing him to see that the Ichirakus were currently occupying the room. The young girl sat at Naruto's bedside, her hand on his arm, whilst her father stood with his back to the door, looking down at the boy's bed. Hiruzen turned to Danzo, a glare fixated on the man's lone eye and his voice coming out in a harsh whisper, enough. I am not an idiot, Danzo. An idealistic fool, maybe, but not an idiot. His eyes turned back to the window. You are correct about the times changing. This incident will already have found its way into the ears of the other cage, and they will no doubt attempt to meddle in the aftermath of the situation. But once Naruto wakes up and is fit enough, I will make sure that I fix my mistakes and have the boy ready to stand up against whatever may come. However, Hiruzen's voice grew more serious. If I find out that you're attempting to make this incident even harder for me, whether that's you're taking steps to undermine my authority or going against me completely, then I will make sure I fix another one of my errors. Danzo's lips curled into a thin scowl, his single visible eye narrowing in frustration as they stood there for a long moment. Hiruzen continued, I know you put the interests of the village above everything else. Now is the time for that more than ever, and I would prefer you to do so by standing with me and not against me. So do I make myself clear? Hiruzen watched the stoic man's emotions bubble to the surface as if he was fighting with himself in weighing the value of continuing the conversation, but ultimately his head dipped slightly, a nod of agreement, before he turned and walked back down the corridor, his cane tapping more furiously as he went. Hiruzen watched him go, knowing that this wasn't the last time they would have this conversation despite his threat, but for now, the conversation was in the past. He turned back once more to the window, his eyes falling on the unconscious Naruto. The boy lay still on his bed, his whole body covered from head to toe in bandages. An IV drip was delivering fluids and of medicine to stabilize his body after the strain it had been put through. The wires that were taped to his head were connected to machines monitoring his brain activity. Screens beside the bed showed erratic, jumpy waves. The boy was suffering from whatever genjutsu Itachi had trapped him in. Ayame leaned forwards, her lips moving near his ears as she spoke to him. Her father placed a hand on his shoulder. For a fleeting moment Hiruzen's eyes played tricks on him, the image of Ayame and Tsuki blurred, causing him to see the boy's parents standing over him. If they were still alive, they would no doubt be chewing him out for the state of their son. If they were alive, this would never have happened to begin with. If there was one promise that he could make as he looked on at the scene play out in front of him, it was that he would not mess up again. If it made him out to be more of a bad guy in the eyes of the blonde, then he would bear it, just so the boy could continue to cherish the future with the people he had found family with. As he turned and walked away, heading back to make sure the Yugakure settlement was agreed upon, he missed the eyes of Tsuki that followed his retreating form. The man's face settling to a frown as the Hokage turned the corner. Ayame's soft voice caused him to turn to his daughter. Is everything going to be okay, Dad? Tsuki let out a deep sigh, his gaze lingering on Naruto for a long moment before he finally responded, his words tasting sour as he spoke them. I really don't know, Ayame. XXX. The crunch of the snowy branches under their feet was drowned out by the sound of the wind whipping past their ears as Shizune, with Tauntaun strapped to her chest, and Tsunade bounded across the snowy landscape. The chill was beginning to die down slightly as they had been traveling towards the border between the land of snow and the land of lightning. The temperature warming up slightly didn't ease the chill that was going down both women's spines as they grew closer to the border. Tsunade-sama, are you sure this is a good idea? Shizune asked, glancing over at her mentor as they cleared a line of snowy pines and began to reach a stretch of open, rocky terrain. The snow was beginning to thin out, giving way to jagged rocks that jutted out the earth like crooked teeth. The horizon ahead was full of stony hills and rocky mountains, and she knew from her missions as a Konoha shinobi that if they continued on the path they were on they would come across Kumogakure sooner than later. Tsunade's face was set in its usual frown. We can't afford to get too close to Kumogakure. Their shinobi are too uptight and patrol their border with an iron fist. There's a port town not too far south of here that we are going to, and if we manage to outrun the Kumo Nin that will no doubt sense us, then we won't have any issues getting there. Shizune nodded but couldn't suppress the nagging feeling that they were still being followed. She was glad to be out of that snowy hamlet, but the barren landscape ahead didn't offer her much comfort either. What will we do if we run into Kumo Nin? She asked, making sure she was ready to follow Tsunade's orders. If they do catch us, we'll let them make the first move. If they are hostile, then we disable them and just keep moving. I don't want any of this getting back to Konoha and putting me in their crosshairs as well, so target their legs and move. As they approached the final tree, before the barren landscape, they pushed extra chakra to their limbs and gained as much momentum as they could in the air before their feet contacted the ground once more. Tsunade slowed down and came to a stop at a rock, her eyes closing and her hands flowing through seals, causing Shizune to do the same. As she opened her eyes once again, she was met with the visage of a smaller and younger Tsunade, the effect of the transformation jutsu being successful. Shizune couldn't see herself, but she knew by the few locks that draped past her ears that her hair had changed to a slightly dark lilac and her skin going a shade lighter than she was normally. Matching eyes? Her master asked, a small smile on her face despite the situation they found themselves in. Shizune reddened with slight embarrassment but nodded nonetheless. Right, let's move. Tsunade didn't want to be out in the open for as long as she could help it, so with the help of her precise chakra control, she focused on making her presence as low as possible whilst pushing all she could to her legs. Shizune, like the perfect student she was, copied Tsunade with ease, and they both sprang forwards across the uneven ground. Their trajectory changed slightly after they spotted a Kumo squad on patrol, but it didn't deter their journey as they pressed southwards towards the port town. XXX. Stepping out of his apartment and locking it behind him, Naruto greeted the morning sun with a smile as he vaulted over the apartment balcony and used chakra to soften his fall. He stretched as he looked down his street, finding it unusually busy for it just going on to 6 in the morning. There was a large crowd of traffic heading in both directions, he noticed, meaning that whatever was going on was probably a festival of some kind. If he had paid any attention to those things then he would know for sure, but he didn't, so with a shrug of his shoulders he stepped out onto the path himself and made his way to Ichiraku's, intending on helping open up shop for the day. As he strolled down the street, a small child suddenly barreled into his legs, tripping and falling to the ground. Naruto looked down at the boy who was nursing a scraped knee. He went to offer a hand, but before he could, a feminine voice called out next to him in the crowd. I'm so sorry. Turning, he noticed in was a woman holding a handful of bags in her arms, her eyes looking between him and the child. As her eyes landed on him, he expected the usual realization, then fear or disdain, but he was surprised when the mother instead helped her child up with a free hand and spoke to him. Apologize to the young man, Yuta. The boy looked up wide-eyed, his face clearly ready to cry, be that from the sore knee, the embarrassment, or both Naruto didn't know, but he managed to choke out a quick mumble, "Sorry, mister." Naruto himself was caught for a moment, staring at the situation, his eyes or ears not believing it for a moment. Realizing he was being rude to those that were apologizing, he gave a small sheepish smile. "It's fine, you're all good little guy." The mother gave him a nod of appreciation before they scuttled back into the crowd, the boy's hand now firmly grasped in his mother's. Naruto stood there for a moment, watching the two figures disappear completely into the crowd. Something about the small meaningless encounter gnawed at him. It was a simple thing, a small mistake of a child that most people would forget by the end of the day, but for him it wasn't. A person in the village had spoken to him with kindness for once. A moment of uneasiness hit him, a slight fuzziness at the back of his mind only continued to fuel it until he shook his head of the feeling. He would remember the moment, not knowing when he would get to experience the small things again. Not wanting to put a downer on things, he brought up a hand seal and pushed chakra through his body. Moments later he was speeding across the rooftops of Konoha, using the body flicker to get him to his destination quicker. He dropped in front of Ichiraku's in no time, realizing that the bustling streets from earlier had gone quiet. Oddly quiet. He made to step into the ramen stand, but he gave a momentary pause. The waning flapped lightly in the breeze and Naruto found that nobody was behind the counter. "Oi Tsuki, Ayame," he called out, receiving no response. He stepped inside, realizing that the aprons were still hung up on the wall. Further into the back, he noticed that the space where the Ichirakus would toss their jackets for the day was also empty. "Is anyone here?" he called out once again, frowning as he stepped back into the front of the stand. The uneasiness from before creeping back into his gut. This time the fuzziness in his mind was at full blast. Usually Ayame would be bustling about, humming a tune whilst Tsuki prepped the stock for the day, and when he would show up, he would be put to work cutting vegetables or preparing noodles for day. But there was nothing, just an unsettling silence that was making his skin crawl. The awning flapped once more, this time the wind more powerful than before. The parting fabric opened and let him see two figures standing outside. He vaulted over the countertop and rushed outside, realizing the backs of the figures. "Hey, Ayame, Tsuki, what are you guys doing?" Silence met his question. His hand reached out to Tsuki's shoulder to get his attention. Forcing the older man to turn, Naruto jumped back at his appearance. His heart raced as he stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. Tsuki's eyes, the deep brown that he shared with his daughter, were now inky black, soulless orbs. They stared straight through him, unblinking and hollow. The expression he wears was slack and devoid of the warmth that Naruto had always known him for. Ayame turned, as if her father turning triggered her to do so. Ayame, the girl he had come to call his best friend and the person he would do anything for, looked nothing like the girl. Her smile that had always been so kind now looked like a lifeless doll as she stared at him like a clone of her father. "Gee guys." His voice cracked as he took a step back. His hands grasped the air in front of him as an attempt to do something, anything. His mind wished he could undo whatever nightmare this was. Their heads broke the silence of the street as they both jerked back unnaturally. Bone pierced through their neck and inky black liquid began rolling down their bodies, staining the white clothing they wore. Their bodies stepped towards him, the movement stiff and mechanical, as though something else was pulling their strings. Naruto's breath quickened. "This isn't real. It can't be real. Do you think this is funny?" He screamed out into the silent street. His mind trying to piece together what was going on. A loud caw echoed down the streets, and as if his mind were a light bulb, everything clicked and fell into place. The bodies that were made out to be Ayame and Tsuki exploded into a flock of crows. Fear impaled his chest as he realized what was still going on. He attempted to cut the flow of chakra to his body and found that he couldn't even feel it to begin with. The world around him shifted as the crows surrounded him. The morning sky bled, shifting into a crimson hue, black clouds swirling unnaturally above. The buildings themselves seemed to fold in on themselves, their shadows stretching and growing over them like a second skin, causing them to look like silhouettes. "Come out, you bastard!" he yelled to the sky. The white sun above him grew smaller and smaller as he stared up at it. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, tendrils of darkness shot out and up from the earth like it was its own being. They wrapped around his ankles before he could react, working their way up his entire body and raising him up into the air. He tried to toss and turn, an attempt to rebel against the forces, but it was of no use. He was trapped. Out from the silhouettes, a figure morphed from the shadows. Two eyes stared into his very soul as he came face to face with Itachi's Sharingan once again. "It's pointless to fight back," Itachi's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere all at once, his lips never moving once. "You are in my reality now, and here I will teach you what it means to live in a world of ignorance." A tanto was brandished into the man's hand. Each step he took caused his adrenaline to spike further. Faster than he could track, the blade was drove deep in between his ribcage, twisting it slowly. Naruto let out a howl of pain, his eyes blurry with unshed tears. For the next 72 hours, Itachi's voice whispered into his ear, "You will live in my reality, under my rules. Each second will feel like an eternity. I will make you beg for your life to end, but it will not come." Another blade pierced his back, another howl escaping him as he turned his head and spotted another figure of Itachi staring back at him. For what felt like forever, Itachi continued to stab, slash, gut and pierce his body. Every time was worse than the last. A single second has passed. Naruto recoiled at the information, his lungs coughing up the black ink from before. "You have 71 hours, 59 minutes and 59 seconds to go." Naruto screamed, the sound lost in the blood-red sky above.